I locked my baby's nursery door with my own 2 hands before going to bed. It was a strict habit of mine, a necessary precaution to help me sleep soundly. But at exactly 2:47 a.m., a blood-curdling scream tore through our silent house. When I grabbed the baby monitor, the grainy night vision showed a man standing perfectly still right beside her crib. It was my husband. He was staring dead into the camera. The terrifying part, my husband had told me he was working 3 states away. Before I tell you what I found when I broke down that door and how it unraveled a nightmare I never saw coming, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories about uncovering the truth. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from today and what time it is there. I love reading your comments. Now let me take you to that Tuesday night. My name is Chloe. I am 31 years old and I work as a corporate accountant. My husband David and I live in a beautiful, sprawling 4-bedroom colonial house in a quiet, affluent suburb just outside of Chicago. From the outside looking in, we were the picture-perfect modern American family. We had the manicured lawn, the safe neighborhood, the good schools, and a beautiful 11-month-old daughter named Lily. But behind the heavy oak doors of our home, the reality was a high-wire balancing act, and I was the only one holding the safety net. I was the primary breadwinner for our family. Every single day, I exhausted myself to the very bone. I spent my days balancing massive corporate spreadsheets, leading high-stakes financial meetings, and managing millions of dollars for my firm. Then I would drive home through gridlocked Chicago traffic to manage our own reality. I paid the heavy mortgage on our house. I paid the monthly lease on David's luxury SUV. I managed the utility bills, the grocery budgets, and the endless stream of expenses that come with raising a child. On top of the financial burden, I was the primary caregiver for Lily. David is 34 years old. He worked as a real estate director, a job title that sounded impressive, but seemed to require him to be constantly on the road. He was handsome, charismatic, and always armed with a perfectly logical excuse for his endless absences. He told me he was building a real estate empire for us. He insisted that all the late nights, the sudden weekend trips to view properties, and the cross-country flights were necessary sacrifices he had to make to secure our daughter's financial future. I loved him implicitly. I trusted him completely. When you are drowning in a sea of responsibilities, working 60 hours a week and raising an infant almost entirely on your own, you cling desperately to the belief that your partner is rowing the boat with you. You have to believe it, even if you never actually see them holding the oars. I never complained about paying for his tailored suits or his expensive client dinners. I believed that marriage was a partnership, a sacred bond built on shared sacrifice and mutual trust. It was a chilly Tuesday night in late October. David was supposedly in Denver, Colorado, trying to close a massive commercial property deal. He had packed his leather overnight bag on Monday morning, kissed my forehead in the kitchen, kissed Lily gently on the cheek, and told me he would be back late Friday night. The house always felt entirely too big and too quiet when he was gone, but I was accustomed to the deep solitude. After putting Lily to sleep, I sat at the kitchen island for 3 hours, finishing a mountain of quarterly tax reports for my clients. My eyes burned from the harsh glow of the laptop screen. Finally, a little past midnight, I shut the computer and started my nighttime routine. I checked the front door to ensure the deadbolt was thrown. I checked the back patio door. I walked over to the security panel on the wall and entered the code. The system beeped happily, and the small light glowed a steady, reassuring green, confirming the house was fully armed and sealed tight. Then I walked down the long carpeted hallway to Lily's nursery. I have always been an incredibly cautious mother. Every night without fail, I would walk into her room and check the window sash to make sure it was locked. I would gently pull her soft pink blanket up over her small shoulders, lightly kiss her warm, sleeping face, and then step quietly backward into the hallway. When I pulled the heavy wooden door shut, I locked it from the outside. It was a habit I developed a few weeks earlier when she started learning how to pull herself up and stand in her crib. I wanted to make sure she was safe and secure in her own little sanctuary, completely protected while I slept down the hall. I twisted the key, heard the heavy metallic click of the lock engaging, and tested the brass knob twice. It was solid, unmoving. I walked to my own master bedroom, placed the digital baby monitor on my nightstand, and collapsed into bed, my body aching with deep, heavy exhaustion. Sleep took me quickly, pulling me down into a dark, dreamless void. Then, the scream happened. It was not a normal baby cry. It was not a soft fuss because she had dropped her pacifier or needed a diaper change. It was a sharp, blood-curdling shriek of absolute primal terror. It was the kind of sound that rips a mother straight out of a dead sleep and sets every single nerve ending in her body on fire. I shot up in bed, gasping for air, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. The digital clock on my nightstand glared in bright red numbers in the dark room. It was 2:47 a.m. The screaming coming from the small speaker of the baby monitor was deafening, filling my quiet bedroom with pure panic. I lunged for the small screen, my hands shaking so violently, I almost dropped the device onto the floor. The camera mounted on the wall in Lily's nursery featured a night vision mode, casting the entire room in a stark, grainy, greenish glow. I fully expected to see Lily standing up in her crib, gripping the wooden rails upset and crying out for her mother to come comfort her. But that is not what I saw. A tall man was standing right next to the crib. He was not moving. He was not reaching down to comfort her. He was standing perfectly, unnervingly still, his dark frame looming over my hysterically crying baby. I pulled the small monitor closer to my face, my breath catching painfully in my throat as I squinted at the glowing screen. The man slowly turned his head away from the crib and looked directly up at the camera lens. It was David, my husband. The man who was supposed to be 1,000 miles away, sleeping in a corporate hotel room in Denver. His expression was entirely blank. His eyes looked hollow dead and utterly devoid of any human emotion. He did not look like the man I married. He looked like a ghost. He just stood there in the dark, staring blankly into the camera lens, while our daughter screamed her lungs out right beside him. A wave of absolute paralyzing terror washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins. This made absolutely no sense. Why was he here? Why was he standing in the dark nursery? Why was he just staring at the camera instead of picking up his terrified child? And how on earth did he get inside a locked house without tripping the perimeter alarm? Adrenaline instantly flooded my system, overriding my deep confusion with fierce primal maternal instinct. I did not care how he got inside the house. I did not care why he was acting like a total stranger. My baby was in danger. I threw the heavy comforter off my legs, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. I dropped to my knees and reached under my bed and grabbed the heavy aluminum baseball bat I always kept hidden there for emergencies. My grip on the rubber handle was painfully tight. I sprinted out of my bedroom and down the long, dark hallway. My pulse pounded violently in my ears, almost drowning out the frantic, terrified screams of my little girl echoing from the nursery. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever in the dark. My analytical mind raced with horrifying, disjointed possibilities. Had he suffered some kind of sudden psychotic break? Was he sleepwalking? Was he trying to hurt us? I reached the nursery door, dropped my shoulder, and grabbed the brass doorknob with my free hand. I twisted it violently, expecting the door to swing open. It did not move. It was still locked. It was exactly the way I had left it hours ago. I rattled the knob again, pure panic clawing at my throat. "David!" I screamed, pounding my fist heavily against the solid wood. "David, open the door! Open this door right now!" There was no answer from inside. There were no footsteps moving across the nursery floor. There was only Lily's continued breathless wailing. I did not waste another second trying to reason with him. I stepped backward, raised the heavy aluminum baseball bat over my shoulder, and swung it forward with every ounce of physical strength I possessed. The metal bat collided with the wooden doorframe right above the locking mechanism. The wood splintered outward with a loud, violent crack. I swung the bat again, and then a third time, sobbing with blind terror, until the metal lock finally gave way and the door burst open, slamming against the interior wall. I stumbled into the nursery, raising the bat high, fully prepared to fight my own husband for my daughter's life. The room was completely empty. I spun around wildly in the center of the nursery, scanning the dark shadows. The wooden rocking chair in the corner was empty. The changing table was completely clear. The white closet door was shut tight. I rushed over to the crib and dropped the bat. It hit the floor with a loud metallic clatter. Lily was sitting up on her mattress, her tiny face flushed red and stained with tears, her small hands gripping the crib rails as she sobbed into the dark. I reached down and scooped her up, pulling her small, trembling body tightly against my chest. "I have got you," I whispered frantically, burying my face in her soft, warm hair. "Mommy is here. I have got you. You are safe." I held her tightly, rocking her back and forth, pacing the floor until her loud screams finally turned into soft, exhausted hiccups. My eyes darted rapidly around the room, searching for any sign of him, any sign of a struggle, any clue of where he could have gone. There was absolutely nothing. I walked slowly over to the window, balancing Lily's weight on my hip. The sash was firmly locked from the inside. The glass was fully intact. I walked over and opened the closet door. There were only tiny clothes hanging on small hangers and boxes of extra diapers stacked on the floor. I knelt down and looked under the crib. Nothing. I walked back out into the hallway and systematically checked the guest bathroom, the spare bedroom, and the staircase leading to the first floor. The entire house was completely silent, filled only with the sound of my own ragged, panicked breathing. I ran downstairs to the main security panel located by the front door. I stared at the digital display. The alarm system was still fully armed. The green light glowed steadily, indicating that no exterior doors or windows had been opened or tampered with since I set the alarm at midnight. My mind began to spin in dizzying, terrifying circles. This was simply impossible. It defied every fundamental law of physics and reality. I'd seen him. I had looked directly at the video monitor just seconds before I ran down the hallway. I saw David standing right there, staring blankly into the camera lens. The nursery door had been solidly locked from the outside. The windows were sealed shut. The house perimeter alarm was active and untouched. There was absolutely no physical way a human being could have been standing inside that room and then vanished into thin air within the 10 seconds it took me to run down the hallway. I walked slowly back upstairs and into the nursery, clutching my daughter so tightly my arms ached. I stared up at the digital camera mounted high on the corner wall. Its small green light blinked quietly in the darkness, recording the empty room. Had I imagined the entire thing, had the crushing weight of working a demanding corporate job and raising an infant alone finally broken my mind? Was I experiencing some kind of terrifying, vivid hallucination brought on by chronic stress and severe sleep deprivation? No, I am an accountant. I deal entirely in hard facts, in numbers that must balance perfectly, in ledgers that reflect the absolute, undeniable truth. I do not have an active, wild imagination. I do not see things that are not there. I saw my husband standing in this room. I saw the shadow of his shoulders. I saw the cold, hollow look in his eyes. A cold, creeping dread settled deep into my bones, freezing my blood. It was a terrible chill that had absolutely nothing to do with the October weather outside. If I was not going crazy, then something far more sinister and calculated was happening inside my own home. Someone somehow had violated the one place where my daughter was supposed to be completely safe. And that someone wore the exact face of the man I loved and trusted. I sat down heavily in the wooden rocking chair, trembling uncontrollably in the dark, holding my sleeping baby against my chest, waiting for the sun to come up. I did not know yet that the nightmare was only just beginning. I did not know that the beautiful life I thought I had built was actually a carefully constructed, elaborate lie. And I certainly had no idea how incredibly far the people I trusted most in this world would go to completely destroy me. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to see his face and match it to the ghost I had just seen hovering over our daughter. My fingers fumbled with the screen of my phone, my hands slick with cold sweat as I hit the FaceTime icon next to David's name. The dialing tone seemed to echo endlessly in the silent nursery. Lily was finally breathing evenly against my chest, her tiny fingers curled into the fabric of my shirt. I stared at the phone screen, praying he would not answer, praying that maybe I'd caught him sneaking back home early for a surprise. But the call connected. The screen blurred, adjusted, and there was David. He was lying on a crisp, white hotel pillow. The room behind him was unmistakably a standard corporate suite, complete with the generic abstract art on the wall and the heavy blackout curtains pulled tight. He squinted at the camera, his hair messy, his face puffy with sleep. He rubbed his eyes and let out a long, exhausted groan. "What is it, Chloe?" He muttered, his voice thick and raspy. "Do you have any idea what time it is here?" I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I just saw you," I whispered, my voice trembling so badly I could barely form the words. "You were just in the nursery. You were standing right next to Lily." David let out a heavy sigh, a sound perfectly engineered to convey deep, burdened patience. He propped himself up on his elbow and flipped the camera around. The lens panned across the room, showing a digital clock reading 1:50 a.m. Mountain Time, a messy room service tray, and his printed itinerary resting on the nightstand. He flipped the camera back to his face. "Chloe, look at me," he said, his tone shifting into that gentle, patronizing cadence he always used when dealing with an upset client. "I am in Denver. I have been in Denver since yesterday afternoon. You are having night terrors again. We talked about this. No one is there." I shook my head frantically, clutching the phone tighter. "No, David. I am telling you, I saw you on the monitor. Someone was in the house. The door was locked, but someone was in here." His expression hardened, the fake sympathy melting into irritation. "Did you call the police?" he asked sharply. "Did you check the alarm?" I told him the alarm was untouched. The doors were locked and the house was empty. I watched his face closely. There was no alarm in his eyes. No panic that his wife and infant daughter might be in danger. Only a cold, calculating annoyance. "You are exhausted, Chloe," he said firmly. "You are working too hard, you are not sleeping, and your mind is playing tricks on you. Take a deep breath, put Lily back in her crib, and go to sleep. We will call Dr. Evans in the morning." He hung up before I could say another word. The screen went dark, leaving me alone in the shadows. Night terrors again. He had planted that phrase so effortlessly. I had experienced one bad dream shortly after Lily was born, brought on by exhaustion and hormones. Just one, but David had spent the last several months subtly referencing it, weaving it into casual conversations with our friends, dropping hints about my mental frailty. As I sat in the rocking chair, a horrible creeping realization began to take root in my mind. He was not trying to calm me down. He was building a narrative. I did not sleep the rest of the night. I sat wide awake in the nursery, rocking chair, my baseball bat resting across my knees, holding Lily until the morning sun finally began to bleed through the blinds. I felt raw, completely hollowed out by fear and confusion. At exactly 7 o'clock, the harsh buzz of the front doorbell shattered the quiet morning. I jumped, my grip tightening on Lily. I crept downstairs, peering cautiously through the frosted glass of the front door. Standing on my porch were two people I absolutely did not want to see. My mother-in-law, Barbara, and David's younger sister, Sarah. I unbolted the door and pulled it open, just a fraction. Barbara pushed her way inside. Before I could even say a word, her expensive perfume instantly overpowering the smell of my morning coffee. Sarah followed closely behind her, carrying a large designer tote bag. David called us. Barbara announced, her voice dripping with weaponized pity. "He was incredibly worried about you, Chloe. He said you had another one of your episodes last night." I bristled at the word. Episodes. I stepped back, adjusting Lily on my hip. "I did not have an episode, Barbara. Someone hacked the baby monitor." "I saw a man in Lily's room." Barbara exchanged a loaded, significant look with Sarah. It was the kind of look two adults give each other when dealing with an irrational, unstable child. Sarah reached out and tried to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "Chloe, honey," Sarah said, using her softest, most condescending preschool teacher voice. David told us you broke the nursery door frame with a baseball bat. You are terrified and we completely understand. The mind can do terrible things to a new mother when she is sleep-deprived. I stared at them, my pulse beginning to race. They were acting as a coordinated unit, completely united in their assessment of my mental state. We are here to help. Barbara chimed in, stepping closer to me. We think it is best if I take Lily back to my house for a few days. You need rest, Chloe. You are clearly suffering from severe postpartum psychosis, and frankly, it is not safe for the baby to be around you when you are swinging weapons at imaginary intruders. The words hit me like a physical blow. Postpartum psychosis. It was a terrifying, heavy clinical diagnosis thrown casually into my foyer by a woman with absolutely no medical degree. They wanted to take my daughter. They were trying to separate us under the guise of maternal concern. Nobody is taking my baby, I said, my voice rising sharp and defensive. I am not crazy. I know exactly what I saw. I saw David on that monitor. Barbara sighed dramatically, pressing a perfectly manicured hand to her chest. Oh, Chloe, listen to yourself. David is 1,000 miles away. You are projecting your anxieties. This is exactly what Dr. Evans warned David about. Your stress levels are inducing visual hallucinations. If you do not let us help you voluntarily, David is going to have to make some very difficult medical decisions regarding your care for her own safety. It was a threat. A thinly veiled, elegant threat delivered right in my own hallway. They were cornering me. They were using my exhaustion, my demanding job, and my fierce protective instincts as evidence against me. I felt the walls of my beautiful, sprawling colonial house closing in, shrinking the space around me until I could barely draw a breath. I was entirely alone, facing a united front that had already decided I was insane. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who they were dealing with. I am not a fragile, hysterical woman who bends under pressure. I am a corporate accountant. I have spent my entire professional career analyzing discrepancies, tracking missing assets, and proving facts with indisputable, cold hard data. My panic began to recede, replaced instantly by a sharp clinical focus. If they wanted to play a game of reality, I was going to use evidence to win it. You think I am hallucinating? I said, my voice suddenly dropping to a calm, deadly whisper. Fine. I will show you exactly what I saw. The camera system automatically backs up all motion-activated footage to the cloud. I have the entire incident recorded. Barbara's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, just a tiny muscular twitch near her eye, but I caught it. Sarah shifted her weight uncomfortably, her grip tightening on her designer tote bag. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and opened the security application. My fingers moved quickly, navigating to the video archive. I selected the calendar date, tapped on the nursery camera icon, and scrolled down the timeline to the early morning hours. I'm going to show you the timestamp at exactly 2:47, I told them, keeping my eyes glued to the screen. You will see a man standing by the crib. You will see his face. The app loaded. The timeline appeared on the screen, marked with small blue indicators, showing where motion had been detected. There was a blue mark at 10:15 p.m. when I had gone in to check Lily's window. There was another blue mark at 6:30 a.m. when the morning sunlight triggered the sensor. Between 10:15 p.m. and 6:30 a.m., the timeline was completely blank. I stopped breathing. I refreshed the application. I closed it and opened it again. I checked the cloud storage folders. I dug into the deleted files bin. There was absolutely nothing. The file for 2:47 a.m. did not exist. The entire history for the middle of the night had been surgically, flawlessly scrubbed clean. I stared at the empty timeline, a cold dread washing over my skin. A normal software glitch might corrupt a file, but it would not selectively delete a specific hour of footage while leaving the rest perfectly intact. This was not a malfunction. This was intentional. This was a calculated digital erasure. Well, Barbara asked, crossing her arms over her chest, a triumphant, sickeningly sweet smile spreading across her face. Show us this mysterious intruder, Chloe. We are waiting. I looked up from my phone. Sarah was looking at me with wide, pitiful eyes, shaking her head sadly as if she was watching a tragedy unfold in real time. They knew. I could see it in their posture, in the relaxed slope of their shoulders. They knew the video was not there because they knew exactly what had happened to it. "I am sorry," I whispered, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I must have misread the timeline. The app is not loading properly." "Oh, sweetheart," Barbara cooed, stepping forward to pat my arm. Her touch felt like a crawling spider. "This is what we mean. You are losing your grip on reality. Let Sarah pack a bag for Lily. We will give you a few days to rest and get your mind right." I pulled my arm away, stepping backward onto the staircase. "No," I said, forcing a weak, apologetic smile onto my face. "You are right. I am just so tired, but Lily is nursing, and I cannot be away from her right now. I will call Dr. Evans today. I promise. I just need a nap. Thank you for checking on us." I practically pushed them out the front door, offering a barrage of fake gratitude and submissive apologies until the heavy oak door finally clicked shut behind them. I threw the deadbolt and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my heart thumping a brutal rhythm in my chest. I was not crazy. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I had not hallucinated a single thing. Someone had hacked into my secure home network. Someone had pushed a terrifying video feed to my monitor, waited for me to react, and then remotely deleted the evidence from the cloud server. And the only people who knew I had supposedly seen things that were not there were standing on my porch, demanding to take my child armed with a pre-packaged medical diagnosis. My own husband and his family were actively, meticulously conspiring to convince me I was losing my mind. They were orchestrating an elaborate psychological trap right inside the walls of my own home. I did not know why they were doing it yet. I did not know what their end goal was, but I knew one thing with absolute terrifying certainty. The man I loved, the father of my child, was the architect of this nightmare. And if I did not figure out a way to prove it, they were going to destroy me and take my daughter away forever. I wiped a single hot tear from my cheek. I walked into the kitchen, placed my phone on the granite counter, and opened my laptop. It was time to stop acting like a terrified wife and start acting like an accountant. The moment the heavy front door clicked shut and the deadbolt slid into place, the suffocating fog of panic in my brain evaporated. For the last several hours, I had been operating entirely on maternal terror and raw adrenaline. My husband and his family wanted me to play the role of the hysterical, sleep-deprived mother losing her fragile grip on reality. They expected me to crumble under the weight of their gaslighting, to doubt my own eyes, to surrender my daughter, and check myself into a facility for much-needed rest. But they severely miscalculated. They forgot that long before I was a mother, I was a corporate forensic accountant. I spend my days dismantling complex financial fraud, finding missing assets, and tracing digital footprints that criminals try desperately to hide. I do not deal in feelings or illusions. I deal in hard, undeniable data. I walked into the kitchen, poured the remaining cold coffee down the sink, and opened my laptop on the granite island. The house was completely silent, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I cracked my knuckles, took a deep breath, and logged directly into our home network's administrative portal. David had always claimed he set up our smart home devices to keep us safe while he was traveling. He handled the cameras, the automated locks, the thermostat. But I was the one who paid the internet bill, which meant I had the master credentials. I bypassed the user-friendly dashboard and pulled up the raw system logs. To an untrained eye, it was just an endless scrolling wall of numbers, IP addresses, and timestamps. To me, it was a detailed story of exactly what had happened in my house while I was asleep. I filtered the traffic logs for the exact time frame of the incident. My eyes scanned the data packets flowing in and out of the router between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning. And there it was. At exactly 2:40 in the morning, 7 minutes before Lily let out that blood-curdling scream, an unrecognized external IP address had forced a secure handshake with the nursery camera. My heart hammered a steady, furious rhythm against my ribs as I traced the data flow. The external source had not just viewed the live feed. They had uploaded a massive packet of data directly to the camera's local cache. It was a video file. They had injected a pre-recorded, seamlessly looped video of David standing in the dark, replacing the live feed of my sleeping baby. The intruder then triggered a remote audio command, likely a sharp noise through the camera's two-way speaker, forcing Lily to wake up and scream in terror. Once I barged into the room and broke the door frame, the external user executed a rapid deletion command, scrubbing the local drive and wiping the cloud history completely clean. I sat back on the tall kitchen stool, the cold granite of the counter pressing against my forearms. The sheer calculated malice of it was breathtaking. This was not a random prank by a teenage hacker. This was a sophisticated, timed psychological attack designed specifically to make me look and feel completely insane. David had recorded himself standing in the dark, likely in a hotel room somewhere, and then pushed that feed into my home while he was safely 1,000 miles away with a perfect alibi. If my husband was willing to orchestrate an elaborate, terrifying digital haunting just to build a medical case against my sanity, I had to assume everything else in our life was a carefully constructed lie. I slammed the laptop shut and marched straight down to the basement. The air down there was cool and smelled faintly of damp cardboard. I pushed past boxes of holiday decorations and old college textbooks until I found a heavy plastic storage bin labeled with David's old business files. Inside, buried beneath tangled charging cords and outdated real estate brochures, was his old silver laptop. He had upgraded to a newer model 2 years ago and told me he had wiped this one clean before tossing it into storage. I carried the heavy machine upstairs, plugged it into the wall outlet, and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, asking for a password. David was a creature of intense ego and predictable habit. I typed in the name of his first successful real estate development, followed by his birth year. The screen unlocked immediately. He had indeed deleted his desktop shortcuts and cleared his browser history. But people who are not financially literate rarely understand how deep digital roots actually go. I bypassed the standard file explorer and opened the hard drive's root directory, initiating a deep search for hidden partitioned folders. It took 20 grueling minutes for the progress bar to complete. When it finally flashed green, a locked folder labeled simply Archive appeared on the screen. I cracked the folder password on my third attempt. Inside were hundreds of PDF files spanning the last 4 years. They were joint credit card statements, bank routing logs, and expense reports. David had always insisted on handling our shared finances, claiming my corporate job was stressful enough, and he wanted to take the burden of household budgeting off my shoulders. I had foolishly, blindly trusted him. I opened the first PDF, my eyes rapidly scanning the lines of data. According to our official tax returns, David's real estate business incurred roughly $2,000 a month in standard operating costs, but these hidden, unedited statements told a violently different story. I scrolled through page after page of unauthorized recurring charges. There were massive monthly withdrawals categorized broadly under property maintenance and staging fees, but the vendor names did not match any legitimate staging companies or contractors in the Chicago area. I cross-referenced the business names with the state registry on my phone. They were dummy corporations, shell companies set up to receive direct deposits. My breath caught in my throat as I tallied the numbers. $5,000 here, $8,000 there. Luxury furniture purchases delivered to zip codes we did not live in. High-end utility payments for a property we did not own. Premium cable and internet packages billed to an address I had never seen. Over the course of 4 years, David had systematically siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars from the joint accounts where my hefty corporate bonuses were deposited. He was not reinvesting my money into his business. He was using my exhausting 60-hour work weeks to fund a massive secret financial sinkhole. A profound, sickening wave of nausea washed over me. I pressed my hand hard against my mouth to stifle a sob. Every late night I spent at the office, every weekend I missed with my daughter to hit a client deadline, every ounce of my energy had been quietly drained away by the man I loved to build a life I knew nothing about. The magnitude of the betrayal was so vast, so incredibly brazen, that it felt like the floor of my kitchen was dropping out from underneath me. Suddenly, the harsh rumble of the garage door opening shattered the quiet of the house. I froze. The digital clock on the stove read 2:15 in the afternoon. David was not supposed to be home until Friday night. Panic flared hot and bright in my chest. He had flown back early. He was here to secure the trap he and his mother had set for me. I slammed the silver laptop shut, shoved it into the bottom drawer of the kitchen island, and threw a stack of clean dish towels over it. I grabbed my own laptop, pulled up a generic spreadsheet, and forced my breathing to slow down. The heavy door leading from the garage into the mudroom swung open. David rushed into the kitchen, dropping his leather overnight bag onto the floor. He looked the absolute picture of a frantic, devoted husband. His hair was artfully disheveled, his tie was loosened, and his face was twisted into a mask of deep, agonizing concern. "Chloe," he gasped, closing the distance between us and wrapping his arms tightly around my shoulders. He buried his face in my neck. God. I came back the second my mother called me. I got on the first flight out of Denver. I am so sorry I was not here. I stood completely rigid in his embrace. The smell of his expensive cologne, the familiar warmth of his chest, the strong grip of his hands on my arms, it all made my skin crawl with absolute revulsion. He was holding me, comforting me for a terrifying event that he himself had engineered. I forced my arms to wrap around his waist, squeezing my eyes shut so he would not see the raw hatred burning in them. "I am okay," I managed to whisper, my voice muffled against his shirt. "It was just a really bad night." He pulled back, holding my face gently between his palms. His eyes were wide with manufactured sympathy. "You are not okay, sweetheart. You are exhausted. You are seeing things. You broke a door frame with a baseball bat. I cannot lose you to this stress. I cannot let you spiral like this." He stepped aside, and my blood ran completely cold. Standing in the mudroom doorway, holding a brown leather briefcase, was an older man with silver hair and a sharp, calculating gaze. Chloe, David said smoothly, his hand resting heavy and possessive on the back of my neck. "This is Dr. Miller. He is a dear trusted friend of my mother's. He is a board-certified psychiatrist. I asked him to come by the house today, just to have a friendly, informal chat with you, just to make sure you are safe." It was an ambush, a perfectly orchestrated clinical ambush. They were not wasting a single second. David had flown a psychiatrist directly into my living room to document my supposed mental breakdown, while the adrenaline of the night terrors was still fresh in my system. If I screamed, if I accused David of hacking the cameras, if I demanded to know where my money was going, Dr. Miller would note my severe paranoia, my aggressive delusions, and my aggressive detachment from reality. They would have the exact medical ammunition they needed to force me into an involuntary psychiatric hold. I felt the jaws of the steel trap snapping shut around me. "Hello, Chloe." Dr. Miller said, his voice entirely too soft, too carefully measured. "I know this feels sudden, but your husband is deeply worried about your well-being. We just want to ask you a few simple questions. Why do not we all sit down in the living room?" I looked at David. He offered me a sad, encouraging smile that made me want to tear his eyes out. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my heart rate to completely stabilize. I channeled every ounce of professional discipline I possessed from years of sitting in highly hostile corporate boardrooms. I could not fight them with anger. I had to fight them with absolute, terrifying compliance. "Of course," I said, my voice soft, pliant, and perfectly steady. "I appreciate you coming, Dr. Miller. I know I have been under a lot of stress lately. I would love to sit down and talk." We moved to the living room. I sat on the edge of the plush cream sofa, folding my hands neatly in my lap. David sat close beside me, his hand resting comfortingly on my knee, playing the role of my anchor. Dr. Miller took the armchair across from us, opening a thick leather notebook and uncapping an expensive fountain pen. "Tell me about last night," Chloe. Dr. Miller began, his eyes sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "David mentioned you experienced a severe visual hallucination. You believed there was an intruder in your child's locked room." I stared at the doctor, the weight of the moment pressing down on my chest. I knew exactly what they needed me to say. They needed me to sound frantic. They needed me to insist the ghost was real. They needed me to sound like a danger to myself and my baby. "It was a terrible nightmare," I said quietly, looking down at my hands with a practiced look of profound embarrassment. "I have been working 60-hour weeks at the firm. I handle all the household finances, and Lily has been teething. I was so exhausted I could barely see straight. I woke up in a panic and my tired brain just played a horrible trick on me. I saw shadows on the monitor and I overreacted. I felt David's hand stiffen slightly on my knee. This was not the script he had anticipated. He expected me to fight to scream about the man on the screen, to demand they check the wiped footage. "You broke the door with a baseball bat," Chloe David interjected smoothly, turning to look at me with furrowed brows. "That is not just a nightmare. That is a violent break from reality." "You were screaming that I was in the room." I offered David a small, weary, apologetic smile. "I know, honey. I was confused and terrified. When a mother thinks her baby is in danger, logic goes completely out the window. I feel so incredibly foolish today. I checked the Monitor app this morning, and of course the timeline was completely blank. Nothing happened, it was all in my head. I clearly need to take a step back from work and focus on my mental health." Dr. Miller scribbled a few notes on his pad, his expression unreadable. "And how are you feeling right now, Chloe? Do you feel like you are a danger to yourself or to Lily?" "Absolutely not," I answered smoothly, maintaining warm, steady eye contact with the doctor. "I am just a very tired working mother who had a single panic attack. I am incredibly grateful to have a husband who cares enough to fly home early to check on me. I promise to scale back my hours and start prioritizing my sleep." The tension in the living room was suffocating. David was staring at the side of my face, his jaw clenched tight. He had brought a doctor into our home to declare me insane, and I was giving them the absolute perfect performance of a rational, self-aware woman experiencing normal maternal burnout. Dr. Miller asked a dozen more questions about my medical history, my mood, and my daily routines. I answered every single one with calm, polite, boring precision. After 40 excruciating minutes, the doctor closed his leather notebook and stood up. "Well, David," Dr. Miller said, adjusting his glasses, "it sounds like your wife experienced a severe stress-induced night terror. It is frightening, certainly, but she is highly lucid, remarkably self-aware, and oriented to reality. I do not see any clinical signs of psychosis or severe delusion. Rest and a lighter workload should resolve the issue." David stood up, masking his intense frustration behind a tight, polite smile. "Thank you, doctor. I appreciate you making the trip out here. I just wanted to be absolutely certain my girls were safe." I walked Dr. Miller to the front door, thanking him profusely for his time. When the door finally closed, leaving David and me alone in the foyer, the air between us felt heavy, thick, and highly toxic. I turned to face the man I had married, the man who was draining my bank accounts to fund a secret life, the man who had terrorized our infant daughter just to build a legal cage around my mind. "You handled that really well, Chloe," David said softly, stepping closer to me, his dark eyes scanning my face for any sign of rebellion. "I am really glad you are seeing reason. I was so worried about you." I looked up at him, smiling a soft, devastatingly fragile smile. "I am so lucky to have you, David. I do not know what I would do without you looking out for me." He leaned down and kissed my forehead, entirely convinced that his gaslighting had worked. He thought he had broken my spirit. He thought I was subdued, terrified, and perfectly under his control. He did not realize that by forcing my hand, he had just awakened a monster far more dangerous than anything he could have possibly planned for. As he turned and walked toward the kitchen to unpack his bags, I stared at his back, a cold, ruthless vow cementing in my mind. I was going to tear his entire world apart, brick by stolen brick, and he was never going to see it coming. The sharp hiss of the water turning on in the master bathroom shower was the only starting gun I needed. David had just stepped under the hot spray, humming a cheerful, upbeat tune that echoed off the tiled walls. He was entirely pleased with himself. He believed he had successfully gaslighted his wife, secured a medical witness to my supposed mental decline, and solidified his grip on my reality. He thought I was sitting on the edge of the bed, trembling and doubting my own sanity. He had no idea that his arrogant confidence was the exact blind spot I was about to exploit. I stood up from the mattress, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpet, and walked silently into his massive walk-in closet. My mind was racing, cataloging every possible place a man hiding a secret financial life would stash physical evidence. I had already bypassed his digital security, but physical paper leaves a different kind of trail. I moved past his neatly pressed suits and his row of polished leather dress shoes. My eyes landed on his heavy, expensive golf bag tucked away in the far back corner. David rarely played golf anymore, citing his grueling travel schedule. It was the perfect, dusty hiding place. I knelt down on the floor and began unzipping the various compartments. The front pockets held nothing but handfuls of wooden tees, a few scuffed balls, and a crumpled scorecard from a country club we could never afford. I moved to the long side pocket, the one designed for storing rain gear. I slid my hand deep into the dark nylon lining. My fingers brushed against something crisp. I pulled out a small stack of folded papers. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I carefully smoothed them out on my knee. The first paper was a faded, crumpled cash receipt from a United States post office located in Oak Brook, a wealthy suburb nearly 2 towns over from our home. The receipt detailed a 6-month renewal payment for a premium private post office box. I stared at the printed address. Why would my husband, a man whose corporate mail was always routed through his downtown office, need a secret, untraceable mailing address 30 miles away from our family? The answer was folded right in underneath the receipt. It was a thick, multi-page document printed on heavy stock paper. I recognized the formatting immediately from my years of balancing corporate property ledgers. It was a comprehensive homeowner's insurance declaration page, but the insured address printed bold and black at the top of the policy did not belong to our sprawling colonial house. It was an address for a 4-bedroom luxury property on Willow Creek Drive, a property located in the exact same zip code as the secret post office box. The primary policyholder listed on the document was David. The secondary resident listed was a name I did not recognize, but the implication hit me with the force of a physical blow. The thousands of dollars bleeding out of my hard-earned paychecks every single month were not disappearing into phantom business expenses. They were literally paying the insurance premiums, the property taxes, and the maintenance costs for a massive second home. The water in the bathroom suddenly shut off. Panic flared hot and bright in my chest. I quickly folded the insurance policy and the post office receipt, shoving them deep back into the nylon pocket of the golf bag. I zipped it shut, stood up, and glided silently out of the closet, just as the bathroom door clicked open. David walked out with a towel wrapped around his waist, his wet hair plastered to his forehead. He looked at me standing near the dresser, his dark eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second before that perfectly manufactured loving smile returned to his face. "Are you feeling any better, sweetheart?" he asked, walking over to kiss the top of my head. "You still look a little pale." I forced my muscles to relax, offering him a weak, submissive nod. "I am just so tired, David. I think I am going to try to lay down when Lily goes down for her afternoon nap." He patted my shoulder approvingly. "That is a great idea. You need to rest your mind. Listen, my mother and Sarah want me to meet them for a quick lunch downtown. Sarah is looking at a new real estate listing and wants my professional opinion. I will only be gone for 2 hours. Will you be okay here alone?" It was a blatant lie. Sarah had absolutely no money to invest in real estate. They were meeting to debrief the psychiatrist visit. They were gathering together to discuss my performance, to evaluate their trap, and to plan their next devastating move against me. I needed to know exactly what they were saying when they thought I was not listening. "I will be perfectly fine," I said softly. "Go help your sister. I will just be resting here." David turned back to the mirror to fix his hair. I walked out of the bedroom and headed straight down the stairs to my home office. I rummaged through my desk drawer until my fingers wrapped around a small rectangular device. It was a digital micro voice recorder, a high-end piece of equipment I had purchased a year ago to dictate complex accounting notes during my long commutes. It was entirely black, smaller than a pack of gum, and could record continuously for 40 straight hours on a single charge. I clicked the small slider switch to the on position. The tiny red recording light blinked twice before going dark, a feature designed for discreet recording. I walked out into this garage. The air was cool and smelled faintly of motor oil and damp concrete. David's luxury SUV was parked in its usual spot. I opened the heavy passenger door, making sure to catch the latch before it could make a sound. I knelt down on the cold garage floor and slid my hand under the premium leather passenger seat. I felt around the metal tracking rails until I found a small hidden gap inside the thick upholstery. I wedged the micro recorder deep into the fabric lining, ensuring it was completely invisible, but perfectly positioned to pick up the acoustics of the vehicle cabin. I stepped back, gently pushed the car door shut, and walked back into the house just as David was coming down the stairs dressed in a sharp, casual suit. "I will be back before you know it," he said, grabbing his keys from the kitchen counter. "Call me if you start feeling anxious again. Do not try to handle an episode on your own." I smiled, waving at him as he backed down the driveway. The moment his car disappeared around the corner, my smile dropped into a hard, cold line. The wait was absolute agony. The afternoon stretched on in a grueling crawl. I sat on the living room floor, playing with Lily, stacking brightly colored blocks and making her laugh. I looked at her innocent, beautiful face, her wide eyes completely unaware of the monster circling her life. I realized in that moment that I was the only wall standing between my daughter and a family of sociopaths. I could not afford to break. I could not afford to make a single mistake. David returned just before sunset. He walked through the front door, whistling, carrying a bag of expensive takeout food from my favorite restaurant. It was a sickeningly sweet gesture, designed to make me feel cared for and secure. He kissed my cheek, told me lunch with his family was entirely boring, and suggested we spend a quiet evening watching a movie. I played my part perfectly. I ate the food. I sat on the couch with my head resting on his shoulder. I laughed at the right moments and let him believe he was a master manipulator in total control of his household. Around 10 o'clock, David announced he was exhausted and headed upstairs to bed. I told him I needed to finish an urgent spreadsheet for a corporate client and would join him shortly. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of his footsteps walking across the master bedroom floor directly above me. Then I slipped silently into the garage. The motion sensor light clicked on, casting long shadows across the concrete. I opened the passenger door of his SUV, slid my hand into the dark gap beneath the leather seat, and pulled out the small black recorder. It was warm to the touch. I walked back inside, bypassed my office, and went straight into the downstairs guest bathroom. It was the only room in the house without exterior windows. I locked the heavy door, turned on the noisy exhaust fan to mask any sound, and sat down on the cold tile floor. I plugged my noise-canceling earbuds into the small jack on the side of the recorder and pressed play. For the first 20 minutes, there was only the low hum of the car engine and the faint sound of a sports radio talk show. Then the engine idled. I heard the distinct sound of 2 car doors opening and slamming shut. The rustle of seatbelts. "Did you get the coffee?" David asked. His voice sounded different on the tape. It lacked the warm, patient tone he always used with me. It was sharp, cold, and entirely transactional. "Yes, we got it," Barbara replied. Her voice echoed loudly from the passenger seat, directly above where I had hidden the microphone. She let out a short, harsh laugh. "Honestly, David, I need a stiff drink after this morning. Having to stand on that porch and pretend to care about that miserable girl was exhausting." Sarah chimed in from the back seat. "I thought she was going to completely lose it when you brought up the postpartum psychosis, Mom. She looked like a trapped animal." They all laughed. It was a casual, easy laughter, the kind of shared amusement a family might have over a private joke. My stomach churned violently, a cold sweat breaking out across my neck. They were highly entertained by my terror. "How did the visit with Dr. Miller go?" Barbara asked, the amusement fading into a crisp, businesslike tone. "Did he get what we need?" David let out a confident sigh. "It went perfectly. She actually made it incredibly easy. She sat there on the couch and openly admitted she was having severe visual hallucinations. She confessed to breaking the doorframe in a blind panic. She told the doctor she was overwhelmed, sleep-deprived, and completely confused about reality." Miller wrote it all down. "He is preparing his preliminary assessment right now. He is going to recommend immediate psychiatric intervention for her own safety." "Excellent," Barbara said smoothly. Her voice held no trace of the warm, grandmotherly affection she displayed whenever she held my daughter, and the camera footage. Are you absolutely certain you wiped it clean? We cannot have her pulling up a video of you standing in that nursery." I logged into the router remotely from the hotel. David replied, his tone dripping with arrogant pride. I pushed the looped video feed to the monitor just long enough to make her scream. As soon as I heard her running down the hall, I scrubbed the local drive and executed a hard delete on the cloud backup. There is zero digital evidence. As far as any judge will be concerned, she woke up in a psychotic state and hallucinated the entire thing. I sat frozen on the bathroom floor, the cold tile biting into my skin, my hands gripping the small recorder so tightly my knuckles turned entirely white. Hearing the explicit confirmation of their psychological torture was devastating, but the conversation was far from over. "So how much longer do we have to wait?" Sarah complained from the back seat. "Jessica is getting really tired of keeping the boy inside all weekend when you are supposed to be out of town. She wants to be able to go to the park like a normal family. She is threatening to call Chloe herself if you do not finalize this soon." My breath stopped completely in my throat. "Jessica, the boy, a normal family. Tell Jessica she needs to be patient for exactly 5 more days." David snapped, his voice suddenly thick with angry authority. "We are not just covering up an affair here, Sarah. If Chloe finds out about the other house before I secure the medical hold, she will file for divorce. With her corporate income, she will take the primary house, she will take Lily, and she will drag me through forensic discovery. I will lose everything. We have to follow the plan exactly as we designed it." Barbara cleared her throat, a sharp, commanding sound that instantly silenced her children. "David is right. We cannot afford a single mistake. This is not just about keeping your second family comfortable. This is about the inheritance. The inheritance. 3 months ago, my parents were killed in a tragic, horrific boating accident on Lake Michigan. The grief had nearly destroyed me. As their only child, I had inherited their entire estate. Their life insurance policies, their retirement accounts, and the sale of their property had been consolidated into a massive trust fund, $2.5 million. Because of my deep accounting background, I had insisted the funds remain in a separate, secure holding account, requiring only my signature for access, until I had time to properly integrate the assets. David had been subtly furious about my decision, masking his anger as concern for optimal market investment. I pressed the earbuds deeper into my ears, my entire body trembling as Barbara delivered the final fatal blow. "Listen to me closely," Barbara said, her voice dropping into a chilling, methodical cadence. "Your wife is currently sitting on $2.5 million of liquid cash that she refuses to let you manage. She is working herself to death paying your bills while you fund a second household. That money belongs to this family now." I heard the sound of the car turning a corner, the turn signal ticking loudly on the recording. "Once the doctor signs off that she is a danger to herself, you get emergency conservatorship, David. You control her money, you take the kid, and she gets locked in a facility." The recording continued to play, capturing their casual conversation as they pulled into a restaurant parking lot, but I could no longer hear their voices over the roaring rush of blood in my ears. I pulled the earbuds out of my ears and let them drop to the bathroom floor. I stared blankly at the white porcelain sink in front of me. The sheer calculating evil of their plan was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. They did not just want to betray me. They did not just want to abandon me for another woman. They wanted to systematically dismantle my mind, steal my daughter, strip away my parents' legacy, and lock me inside a psychiatric ward so they could fund a luxury life with my stolen wealth. A profound, shattering grief washed over me, threatening to break me right there on the bathroom floor. I thought of my sweet baby girl sleeping upstairs, completely unaware that her father was actively planning to take her mother away forever. I thought of the countless hours I'd worked to support a man who viewed my life as nothing more than a bank account waiting to be violently hijacked. But as the grief crested, it did not drown me. It crystallized. The hot, suffocating panic that had ruled my life for the past 24 hours evaporated entirely, leaving behind a cold, terrifyingly sharp clarity. I stood up slowly from the bathroom floor. I looked at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. The woman looking back at me was no longer a terrified, exhausted wife. She was a corporate forensic accountant who had just been handed the exact blueprints of her enemy's entire operation. David thought he had built a perfect trap. He thought I was weak, broken, and completely under his control. He had no idea that he had just handed me the shovel I was going to use to bury him. I turned off the exhaust fan, unlocked the bathroom door, and walked out into the silent hallway. It was time to go to war. The morning sun was brutally bright as it filtered through the kitchen blinds. I stood at the granite island, pouring a cup of dark roast coffee, while my husband sat across from me, scrolling through his phone with the relaxed posture of a man who believed he held the entire world in the palm of his hand. I had spent the night mapping out my survival strategy, analyzing the horrifying audio recording I retrieved from his car, and practicing my performance in the bathroom mirror until my face felt like a perfectly molded mask of fragile submission. "David," I said, keeping my voice soft and deliberately unsteady. "I cannot shake this terrible anxiety. My chest feels incredibly tight, and I barely slept. I think I need to take your advice and step away for the day. I looked up a wellness retreat downtown. They have a day pass for their meditation rooms and hydrotherapy pools. I just need a few hours of total silence to clear my head." He looked up from his phone, his dark eyes instantly softening into that manufactured, sickeningly sweet concern. He stood up, walked around the kitchen island, and wrapped his strong arms around me. "I think that is a wonderful idea, Chloe," he murmured, kissing the top of my head. "You have been pushing yourself way too hard at the firm. Take the entire day. Turn off your phone. I will cancel my morning site visits and stay right here with Lily. You just focus on resting your mind." He even pulled out his wallet and offered me his credit card, telling me to treat myself to a deep tissue massage. I took the card with a grateful, trembling smile, knowing perfectly well that the plastic in my hand was paid for by the very bank accounts I funded. I packed a small canvas tote bag, kissed my sweet daughter goodbye, and walked out to my car. The moment the garage door closed behind me, the fragile, exhausted wife completely vanished. My hands stopped shaking. My spine straightened. I plugged the address from the hidden insurance policy into my navigation system. The destination was a wealthy, gated residential enclave located exactly 2 hours away from our home. The drive out of the city was a grueling, agonizing exercise in mental discipline. I gripped the leather steering wheel as the busy urban highways slowly gave way to wide, winding suburban roads lined with towering oak trees and pristine wooden fences. With every passing mile, my analytical mind began to translate the numbers I had found on his hidden bank statements into raw human sacrifice. To an accountant, money is never just currency. Money is stored energy. It represents the actual physical hours of your life that you trade for survival. I thought about the crushing 60-hour work weeks I endured year after year. I thought about the relentless corporate meetings, the skipped lunches, the stress migraines that blinded me, and the countless evenings I missed putting my own baby to sleep because I was working late to secure a promotion. I had bled my own life dry to build a foundation for my family. And all the while, David was quietly siphoning that exact life force away, funneling my stolen energy into a phantom address 2 hours north. When I finally turned onto Willow Creek Drive, the stark reality of his theft hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. This was not a modest neighborhood. This was an exclusive, sprawling community of custom-built luxury estates. The properties sat far back from the road, boasting perfectly manicured lawns, circular driveways, and pristine stone facades. I drove slowly down the wide, quiet street until the navigation system announced I was approaching my destination. I pulled my car over onto the shoulder of the road, parking behind a large, weeping willow tree that provided perfect cover. I turned off the engine, rolled down the window just enough to let in the crisp autumn air, and looked at the house. It was a breathtaking, modern architectural masterpiece. It had a massive 3-car garage, tall bay windows that gleamed in the morning sun, and a beautifully landscaped front porch flanked by expensive stone planters. It was a house that screamed of new, effortless wealth. It was easily worth double the value of the home I shared with David. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, listening to the absolute silence of the neighborhood. The waiting was excruciating. Every passing minute felt like a heavy stone pressing down on my chest. My mind raced with frantic questions. Was it just an investment property? Was he renting it out to wealthy clients and pocketing the income? Was I completely misinterpreting the insurance documents? I waited in the cold car for over an hour, my eyes burning as I stared unblinking at the heavy mahogany front door of the estate. Just before 11 o'clock, the front door finally clicked open. My breath caught painfully in my throat. I sank lower into my seat, peering through the leaves of the willow tree. David walked out onto the front porch. He was not wearing his usual tailored business suits. He was not dressed for the high-stakes client meetings he claimed kept him away from home. He was wearing casual khaki shorts, a soft gray sweater, and comfortable running shoes. He looked relaxed, youthful, and completely unburdened. He turned around to face the open doorway, laughing at something being said inside. Then he reached down and scooped a child into his arms. It was a little boy. He had thick, dark, curly hair and was wearing bright red sneakers. He looked to be about 3 years old. David tossed the boy up into the air, catching him easily as the child let out a loud, joyous squeal that carried all the way across the manicured lawn to my parked car. The math hit my brain with a violent, crushing force. 3 years old. That meant David had fathered this child 4 years ago. He was sleeping with someone else, building an entirely separate family, during the exact same time we were undergoing expensive, emotionally draining fertility treatments to conceive Lily. He had held my hand in sterile medical clinics, comforting me through my tears of frustration, while he already had a healthy son growing in another woman's home. A moment later, the mother stepped out onto the porch to join them. I recognized her face immediately. It was Jessica. She was 24 years old. She used to be the front desk administrative assistant at David's real estate firm. 2 years ago, David told me she had moved out of state to pursue a better career opportunity. Now here she was standing on the porch of a multi-million-dollar estate, wearing expensive yoga clothes and holding a bright blue sippy cup. She walked over to David, smiling radiantly. She handed him the cup, brushed a stray curl from the little boy's forehead, and leaned up to kiss my husband. It was not a quick, casual peck. It was a deep, lingering, comfortable kiss. The kind of kiss shared by a couple who had built an entire life together. I sat frozen in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel, so tightly my fingernails bit into my own palms. The physical pain in my chest was absolute agony. I was watching my husband play the role of the perfect, loving family man, entirely funded by the money he stole from my bank accounts. Jessica was living the relaxed, carefree life of a wealthy, stay-at-home mother, entirely subsidized by my grueling corporate labor. I was paying for the roof over their heads. I was paying for the clothes on their backs. I was literally financing my own replacement. I thought the betrayal could not possibly cut any deeper. I thought I had reached the absolute bottom of this nightmare. I was wrong. The soft purr of a luxury engine caught my attention. I looked in my rearview mirror. A gleaming silver Lexus SUV was rolling smoothly down the quiet suburban street, heading directly toward the modern stone house. I recognized the license plate instantly. The Lexus turned into the wide circular driveway and parked directly behind David's second car. The driver's side door opened and my mother-in-law Barbara stepped out. A second later, my sister-in-law Sarah emerged from the passenger side. My heart completely stopped. The blood rushing through my veins turned to absolute ice. I watched in silent, paralyzed horror as Barbara walked up the stone pathway, her face glowing with genuine, radiant joy. She was carrying 2 large, brightly colored gift bags. Sarah followed closely behind her, holding a wrapped present, decorated with cartoon dinosaurs. Jessica walked down the porch steps to greet them. Barbara threw her arms around the young woman, pulling her into a tight, warm embrace. It was the kind of loving, affectionate hug a mother gives to her cherished daughter-in-law. Sarah hugged Jessica next, laughing brightly at something the younger woman said. Then Barbara turned her attention to the little boy. She dropped to her knees right there on the pristine walkway, opening her arms wide. The 3-year-old shrieked with happiness and ran directly into his grandmother's embrace. Barbara kissed his cheeks, repeatedly laughing and pointing to the gift bags she had brought for him. David stood on the porch, watching his mother, his sister, his mistress, and his son all gathered together in the morning sun. He looked incredibly proud. He looked incredibly happy. I could not breathe. The oxygen had been violently sucked right out of my car. They all knew. Every single one of them knew. This was not a case of a husband hiding a shameful secret from his disappointed, morally upright family. This was a grand, coordinated conspiracy. Barbara and Sarah were not just turning a blind eye to David's infidelity. They were active, enthusiastic participants in his double life. They had completely embraced Jessica and the boy. They had welcomed them into their family dynamic with open arms. And suddenly, the audio recording I had listened to the night before clicked into horrifying, razor-sharp focus. Just yesterday morning, Barbara and Sarah had stood in my foyer. They had looked me right in the eyes with expressions of deep, agonizing pity. They had tried to convince me I was suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. They had offered to take my infant daughter away from me for her own safety. They had orchestrated an elaborate, cruel performance to make me feel completely insane. And why? Because they needed to get me out of the way. They needed me locked inside a psychiatric facility so David could secure emergency conservatorship over my life. They were actively plotting to steal the $2.5 million trust fund my dead parents had just left me. They were going to use my massive inheritance to permanently fund this beautiful, luxurious fantasy life I was currently watching unfold on the manicured lawn. I was not a family member to them. I was never a daughter to Barbara. I was never a sister to Sarah. To the entire family, I was nothing more than a highly efficient, disposable cash machine. They had used my income to buy this house for Jessica. And now that a massive windfall of cash had landed in my lap from my parents' tragic death, they were ready to discard me completely. They were going to strip me of my money, strip me of my child, lock me in a padded room, and then drive back to this beautiful suburban estate to celebrate their victory together. I sat alone in the driver's seat, watching Barbara hand a toy dinosaur to the little boy. I watched Jessica smile and lean her head on my husband's shoulder. A profound, chilling silence settled over my mind. The initial shock of the betrayal evaporated entirely, burning away under the intense, blinding heat of my absolute fury. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was for victims, and I refused to be a victim. They thought they had built the perfect trap. They thought they were dealing with a fragile, sleep-deprived, emotionally broken woman who would simply collapse under the weight of their gaslighting. They thought I was going to quietly surrender my mind, my money, and my daughter into their waiting hands. I reached down and turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, a low, steady growl in the quiet neighborhood. I shifted the car into drive, my hands gripping the steering wheel with deadly, calculated precision. I took one last look at the happy, smiling family gathered on the sunny porch. "Enjoy the house, David," I whispered to the empty car. "Enjoy the money. Enjoy the fantasy. Because by the time I am finished with you, you will not have a single dime to your name, and you will never see the outside of a prison cell again." I pulled away from this curb and drove back toward the city, leaving their beautiful lie behind. I had exactly 5 days before David filed his psychiatric hold with the court. 5 days to dismantle his entire existence. I did not drive back to the fake wellness retreat, and I did not drive back to my empty home. I drove directly toward the towering glass skyscrapers of downtown Chicago. I needed a lawyer, and I needed to start a war. I kept my foot pressed firmly on the brake pedal of my parked car while my entire universe shattered into a million jagged pieces. Through the drooping leaves of the weeping willow tree, I watched my mother-in-law bounce a toddler on her hip, while my husband wrapped his arm around a 24-year-old woman. The urge to slam my car into gear, tear across that perfectly manicured lawn, and scream until my vocal cords bled was almost overwhelming. It was a hot primal instinct burning in the back of my throat, but I did not move a single muscle. I did not honk my horn. I did not march up the stone pathway to confront them. I simply sat there in the quiet suburban street and let the agonizing pain wash over me until it instantly hardened into something entirely different. It hardened into a cold, heavy, terrifying weapon. I knew exactly what would happen if I showed my hand right then and there. If I kicked down that heavy mahogany front door and threw my accusations in their faces, I would be handing David the exact reaction he desperately needed to complete his trap. He would immediately pull out his phone and dial 911. He would point to my tear-streaked face, my screaming rage, and my frantic behavior as absolute, undeniable proof that I was experiencing a violent psychotic break. He would tell the arriving officers that I was a danger to the public and a severe threat to my infant daughter. He would expedite the legal conservatorship process before the sun even set. I would be forcibly escorted into the back of an ambulance, strapped to a gurney, and locked inside a sterile hospital room while my baby girl was handed directly over to the very people who had conspired to steal her mother away. I refused to let that happen. I took a long, slow breath, feeling the chilled autumn air fill my lungs. I mentally packed away the visceral, sickening agony of seeing my husband kiss his former secretary. I locked the image of my in-laws bringing gifts to his secret child inside a dark vault in my mind. Right now, raw grief was an entirely useless metric. Pure calculating anger, however, was highly operational. I shifted my car into drive, pulled smoothly away from the curb, and steered back toward the busy interstate leading into the towering steel and glass skyline of downtown Chicago. Every single mile that ticked by on my dashboard stripped away another layer of the naive, trusting wife I used to be. By the time the massive skyscrapers came into view, I was operating purely as a forensic corporate accountant. I had spent my entire adult life navigating the treacherous waters of corporate finance. I knew exactly how to dismantle a corrupt organization from the inside out. I knew how to trace stolen assets through layers of dummy corporations, and I knew how to ruin people who thought they were smarter than the paper trail they left behind. My marriage was no longer a partnership built on love and trust. It was a highly hostile corporate entity, and I was going to completely liquidate it. I drove directly to a sleek, imposing high-rise building located in the very heart of the Chicago financial district. I did not need to spend hours searching for adequate legal representation. In my specific line of corporate work, you hear the quiet, fearful whispers of who the true sharks in the city actually are. I needed Amanda. She was widely considered the absolute apex predator of family and financial law in the state of Illinois. She was a ruthless, brilliant attorney known specifically for completely annihilating spouses who attempted to hide assets or manipulate the legal system during high-net-worth divorces. I rode the silent mirrored elevator up to the 52nd floor and walked straight into her expansive, glass-walled corner office. I carried my canvas tote bag, not like a purse, but like a heavy briefcase loaded with live ammunition. Amanda sat behind a massive polished oak desk, wearing a sharp-tailored charcoal suit. She had piercing dark eyes and a demeanor that offered zero unnecessary warmth. I did not shed a single tear when I took a seat in the heavy leather chair across from her. I did not offer a tragic, emotional backstory. I simply opened my laptop, pulled out my printed spreadsheets, and began to systematically present my case. I laid out the complex router logs, proving the malicious digital intrusion into my home network at 2:40 in the morning. I showed her the hidden credit card statements, the unregistered shell companies, and the extensive property insurance policy for the luxury estate in the suburbs. Then, I placed my phone on her desk and played the micro recorder audio, capturing the chilling conversation between David and Barbara, detailing their exact plot to lock me inside an asylum in order to steal my $2.5 million inheritance. Finally, I slid the digital photographs I had taken just an hour ago across her desk, perfectly capturing David, his mother, his sister, his mistress, and his secret 3-year-old son, gathered happily on the front porch of a house I was unknowingly funding. Amanda listened to the entire presentation in absolute professional silence. She did not offer me sweet platitudes or pass me a box of tissues. She just stared at the undeniable mountain of evidence I had constructed. That cold, calculated professionalism was exactly why I chose her. She understood that we were not dealing with a broken marriage, but with an active financial and psychological crime ring. "You have compiled a truly extraordinary sequence of evidence." Chloe Amanda said, her voice a calm, dangerous drawl that filled the quiet office. "Your husband is exceptionally brazen to orchestrate a psychological attack of this magnitude, But he made a massive fatal mistake by leaving this extensive digital trail for a professional accountant to uncover. She immediately turned her attention to her dual computer monitors and rapidly typed in her credentials to access the highly secure county court database. She explained that we needed to see if David had made any official legal maneuvers regarding the psychiatric conservatorship yet. The heavy silence in the glass-walled office stretched on for several agonizing minutes. I watched her dark eyes scan the complex lines of legal text populating her screen. Suddenly, her typing stopped. Her jaw tightened visibly. The temperature in the expansive room seemed to drop 10 degrees in a matter of seconds, Chloe Amanda said, keeping her eyes glued to the glowing monitor. Your husband did not just hire a psychiatrist for a friendly, concerned house call yesterday. He has already retained extremely aggressive legal counsel. His attorney filed a preliminary ex parte petition for an emergency psychiatric hold against you at exactly 9 o'clock this morning. The words hit me like a physical punch to the throat. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. An emergency psychiatric hold. They were moving so much faster than I had originally anticipated. Amanda turned the large monitor so I could see the dense legal filing for myself. He submitted a sworn affidavit claiming you are a severe and immediate danger to yourself and your infant daughter, Amanda explained, pointing to the bottom of the digital document. He cited your door-breaking incident as a violent psychotic episode. He even included a preliminary note from the doctor, endorsing your immediate involuntary commitment to a mental health facility. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold, terrifying sweat break out across the back of my neck. I asked what this meant, forcing my voice to remain steady, despite the absolute panic rising in my chest. Amanda looked me dead in the eyes, her expression completely uncompromising. It means a superior court judge is scheduled to review this emergency petition and issue a binding legal ruling in exactly 5 days. 5 days. The timeline felt like a heavy concrete block crushing my lungs. In less than one single week, a judge sitting in a courtroom downtown could sign an official order allowing men with badges to walk up to my front porch, knock on my door, take my screaming baby out of my arms, and strap me to a hospital bed entirely against my will. My husband had weaponized the legal and medical systems to completely erase my existence and steal my entire inheritance. The walls of the office felt like they were closing in on me, pressing the oxygen right out of the room. I had spent years meticulously planning for my family's future, and in 5 days, that entire future could be legally terminated by a single stroke of a judge's pen. We do not have months to build a slow, methodical divorce case. Amanda continued, leaning forward over her massive oak desk. We do not even have weeks. We have less than 120 hours to entirely dismantle your husband's secret life before he uses the law to completely destroy yours. If we fail, you lose your daughter, your freedom, and your family legacy in one single blow. I looked away from the computer screen and stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling gray city below. The sheer, terrifying magnitude of what I was facing should have completely broken me. A weaker person would have collapsed under the immense crushing pressure of a 5-day countdown to institutionalization. Instead, it fueled a massive roaring fire deep inside my soul. I thought about Lily waiting for me at home, completely unaware of the looming danger. I thought about the sweat and tears I poured into my career, only to have the fruits of my labor stolen by a monster who smiled in my face while emptying my accounts. I turned back to the most ruthless attorney in the city of Chicago and nodded my head. Then, we do not fail, I said, my voice ringing with absolute chilling certainty. We tear his world apart, starting right now. The drive back from downtown Chicago to my quiet suburban neighborhood was the longest journey of my life. I parked my car in the driveway and sat behind the steering wheel for a full 5 minutes. I had to shed the sharp armor I had just built with Amanda. I had to physically shrink myself. I practiced letting my shoulders slump. I rubbed my eyes until they were red and bloodshot. I allowed a slight tremor to enter my hands. When I finally turned the key in the front door, I was no longer a forensic accountant preparing for war. I was Chloe, the exhausted, terrified mother who was rapidly losing her grip on reality. The house smelled of roasted chicken and expensive vanilla candles. David and Barbara were sitting at the kitchen island speaking in hushed, serious tones. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, their conversation stopped dead. David rushed over his face, painted with that sickeningly perfect mask of spousal concern. He wrapped his arms around me. I forced my body to go entirely limp against his chest, burying my face in his shirt. "I am so sorry I took so long," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. "I just drove around for hours. My head feels like it is completely filled with fog. I cannot think straight, David. I am so tired." He stroked my hair, casting a triumphant look over my shoulder toward his mother. I could not see her face, but I knew she was smiling. "It is okay, sweetheart," David murmured, guiding me toward the living room sofa. "You are safe now. Mom came over to help with Lily so you could rest. We are going to get you through this." I sat heavily on the plush cushions, staring blankly at the coffee table. Barbara walked into the room carrying a small glass of water and a delicate porcelain saucer. Resting on the center of the saucer was a small, round white pill. "Here you go, dear Barbara," said her voice dripping with artificial honey. "Dr. Miller left a prescription for a mild sedative. He said it would help calm your nerves and stop those awful visual hallucinations. You need to sleep, Chloe. A mother simply cannot function when her mind is playing such terrible tricks on her." I looked at the pill. I knew exactly what it was. It was not meant to help me heal. It was meant to keep me docile, sluggish, and easily manipulated during the exact 5-day window David needed to finalize his psychiatric hold. If I refused to take it, they would note my non-compliance and paranoia. If I swallowed it, I would be too incapacitated to execute Amanda's legal strategy. I reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the pill. "Thank you, Barbara," I said, looking up at her with wide, grateful eyes. "I really do not want to see those things anymore. I just want my mind to be quiet." I placed the pill in my mouth, tucked it swiftly under my tongue, and took a large gulp of water. I swallowed loudly, opening my mouth just a fraction to prove the pill was gone. Barbara smiled a genuine expression of predatory satisfaction. She patted my knee and walked back to the kitchen. I laid my head back against the sofa cushions, closed my eyes, and waited. 5 minutes later, I excused myself to use the downstairs bathroom. The moment the door locked, I spit the dissolving white paste into the sink, rinsed my mouth with cold water, and washed every trace of their poison down the drain. When I returned to the living room, I leaned into the performance with everything I had. I acted lethargic. I slurred my words slightly. I asked David repetitive questions about the date and the time, pretending my memory was failing. I watched the arrogant confidence bloom in his eyes. He genuinely believed he had won. He believed he had successfully broken the woman who managed millions of dollars for a living. He and Barbara relaxed completely. They stopped whispering. They stopped hiding their phone screens. They grew careless because they thought the prey was already dead in the trap. Around 10 o'clock, David helped me up the stairs to the master bedroom. He tucked me under the heavy duvet, kissed my forehead, and told me to sleep for as long as I needed. I closed my eyes and let my breathing slow into a deep, rhythmic pattern. I lay perfectly still in the dark for 3 agonizing hours, listening to the sounds of the house settling. I heard David brush his teeth. I heard him climb into bed beside me. I waited until his breathing deepened into the heavy, unmistakable snores of a man who had zero guilt keeping him awake. It was 1:15 in the morning. The house was completely silent. The stage was set. It was time for the heist. I slipped out from under the covers with practiced silence. I did not wear shoes. I moved like a ghost down the hallway, bypassing the creaky floorboards I had memorized over the years. I stepped into my home office, shut the solid oak door, and locked it. I pulled the heavy blackout curtains tightly across the windows so no light would bleed out into the yard. I sat down at my desk, booted up my personal laptop, and cracked my knuckles. David was a real estate director, but he was incredibly sloppy when it came to digital hygiene. He relied heavily on his firm's secure portal, assuming the corporate firewalls would protect his private transactions. But I had spent my entire career auditing corporate financial systems. I knew that firewalls were only as strong as the person holding the keys. I connected to my personal virtual private network, masking my IP address to ensure my digital footprints could not be traced back to our home router. I opened a secure browser and navigated to the employee login portal for David's real estate brokerage. I had memorized his primary administrative password months ago when he foolishly asked me to help him format a basic spreadsheet. He used the same password for everything. The portal loaded, granting me full administrative access to his entire professional dashboard. I did not waste time looking at his standard client listings. I went straight for the hidden accounting ledgers. I bypassed the main directory and dug into the archived transaction folders. It was like opening the door to a massive, perfectly organized criminal enterprise. For the next 3 hours, I methodically downloaded his entire secret life. I found the original purchase agreement for the luxury estate on Willow Creek Drive. The down payment had been wired through 3 different limited liability companies before landing in the seller's account. I traced the employer identification numbers of those companies directly back to David. He had set up a classic money laundering funnel. He was actively overcharging his legitimate real estate clients for staging and appraisal fees, filtering the excess cash through his shell companies, and using the clean money to pay for Jessica's multi-million-dollar suburban fantasy life. But the financial rot went so much deeper than his business clients. I opened a subfolder labeled Personal Expenses and felt the blood freeze in my veins. I found the exact routing numbers for our joint savings accounts. Beside them were detailed transfer logs showing hundreds of thousands of dollars quietly siphoned away over the last 4 years. He had timed the thefts perfectly to coincide with my massive corporate bonus payouts, moving the funds in small, undetectable increments, so the overall balance never looked suspiciously low to a casual observer. But I was not a casual observer. I was a certified public accountant, and the math was absolutely damning. He had stolen nearly $400,000 of my own earnings. My fingers flew across the keyboard, saving every single PDF, every bank statement, and every wire transfer receipt to a highly encrypted external hard drive I had purchased that afternoon. I was building a cage of undeniable financial evidence that no slick defense attorney could ever argue away. Then, I hit the absolute motherlode. I found a folder simply labeled Tax Documents, 2023. I opened the file and stared at the digital scans inside. They were property deed transfers and massive gift tax exemption forms. David had successfully moved a significant portion of his hidden liquid assets into a private trust for his secret 3-year-old son. But in order to bypass the federal gift tax limits and hide the transfer from my legal view as his spouse, he needed an independent guarantor to sign the documents as the primary benefactor. I zoomed in on the signature line at the bottom of the federal tax form. The signature belonged to Barbara. My sweet church-going, deeply concerned mother-in-law had actively forged her own deceased husband's signature to act as the primary wealth guarantor for David's secret child. She had committed blatant, undeniable federal tax fraud to help her son hide stolen marital assets. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the glowing screen in the pitch-black office. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. Barbara had stood in my kitchen that very morning, handing me a sedative and telling me I was an unfit mother, losing my mind. Meanwhile, her own signature was permanently inked on fraudulent federal tax documents that carried a mandatory minimum prison sentence. A cold, deeply satisfying smile spread across my face. It was the first genuine smile I had managed to produce in 2 days. Amanda was right. Feeling validated when the truth comes out is not cruelty. It is justice. And I was holding enough justice in my hands to bury this entire family. I continued the download. I grabbed everything. I pulled the private email chains between David and his corporate lawyer, discussing the timeline for my emergency psychiatric hold. In those emails, David explicitly stated that I was perfectly healthy, but that his mother had successfully secured a cooperating doctor who would sign the commitment papers without conducting a thorough evaluation. It was a direct written admission of medical conspiracy. By 4:30 in the morning, my external hard drive contained over 10 gigabytes of stolen data, fraudulent tax returns, money laundering receipts, and conspiracy evidence. It was a complete, irrefutable map of their criminal enterprise. I safely ejected the hard drive, tucked it into the lining of my canvas tote bag, and wiped my laptop's cache clean. I shut down the computer, opened the blackout curtains, just a fraction to let the early morning light filter in, and quietly unlocked my office door. I walked back into this master bedroom. David was still dead asleep, his chest rising and falling in a peaceful, undisturbed rhythm. I climbed carefully back under the heavy duvet and stared up at the ceiling. I did not feel exhausted. I did not feel terrified. I felt like a loaded weapon. They thought they had until Saturday to lock me away. They thought they had perfectly backed me into a corner where no one would ever believe a single word I said. But they had absolutely no idea that while they were busy playing family in their secret suburban house, the woman they thought they had broken had just quietly dismantled their entire empire in the dark. I closed my eyes as the sun finally broke over the horizon. Tomorrow, I would meet with Amanda to establish the blind trust and secure my medical clearance. But tonight, the heist was complete. The evidence was secured, the trap was officially set. And when the church gala arrived this weekend, they were all going to walk right into it. Wednesday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky pouring thick sheets of rain over the city of Chicago. I did not feel the bone-deep exhaustion of the sleepless night I had just survived. I felt only the heavy metallic weight of the encrypted hard drive hidden deep inside my leather tote bag. That small plastic square contained every single lie, every stolen dollar, and every forged signature my husband had carefully hidden from me over the last 4 years. I dressed in a sharp black suit, kissed my sweet Lily softly on the cheek, and secured her safely in her car seat. I drove her straight to her high-security premium daycare center. I stood in the pouring rain and watched until her teacher carried her safely behind the locked glass doors. Only then did I put the car in drive and head toward the towering skyscrapers downtown. I had exactly 96 hours before a judge would review David's emergency psychiatric petition. I was going to use every single one of those hours to completely dismantle his future. Amanda was already waiting for me when I stepped into her expansive corner office. She had called in her senior estate partner, a formidable man with silver hair and a reputation for creating absolutely impenetrable financial fortresses. We did not waste time with pleasantries or small talk. We moved at lightning speed, driven by the terrifying ticking clock of the court system. I handed over the documentation regarding the $2.5 million inheritance my late parents had left me. Amanda and her partner immediately began restructuring the entire inheritance into an irrevocable blind trust. They drafted the legal framework with ruthless precision. This was not a standard savings account. This was a financial vault designed to completely sever my husband from any possible marital claim. The terms we set were absolute and unyielding. Even in the event of a severe medical emergency, even if a judge temporarily granted David full conservatorship over my person, the trust was legally structured to instantly lock down. It required the unanimous approval of 3 independent fiduciaries to release a single dime, and David was explicitly permanently barred from acting as a trustee. I sat at the massive oak conference table, listening to the rain beat against the floor-to-ceiling windows as I signed my name over and over again on the thick stacks of legal paper. With every stroke of my pen, I felt another heavy chain fall away from my chest. My hands did not shake. I felt a profound, fierce sense of duty to my late parents. They had worked their entire lives to build that wealth. They had saved and sacrificed to ensure their only daughter would always be secure. I was absolutely damned if I was going to let their life savings be used to pay the property taxes on a secret suburban mansion for a 24-year-old mistress. When the final notary stamp was pressed onto the paper, Amanda looked at me and nodded. The money was safe. David could drag me through the mud. He could try to lock me in a padded room, but he would never touch a single penny of my family legacy. But protecting the money was only the first step. Amanda knew that if we did not obliterate the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation David had orchestrated, I could still lose my freedom and my daughter. She made a single phone call and handed me a slip of paper with an address located across the city. "You are going to see Dr. Harrison Reed," Amanda told me, her voice leaving no room for argument. "He is a board-certified court-appointed forensic psychiatrist. He is the absolute gold standard in family law disputes in this state. Judges consider his evaluations to be gospel. He is not a friend of a friend like that fraud David brought to your house. He is impartial, brilliant, and utterly ruthless when it comes to finding the truth. You are going to tell him everything." I drove across the city to a highly sterile, intimidating medical building. Dr. Reed was a tall, serious man who did not offer me a warm, comforting smile. He ushered me into a quiet, soundproof office and began the most grueling, rigorous psychological evaluation I have ever experienced in my entire life. It was not a casual chat on a plush sofa. It was a relentless 4-hour battery of intense cognitive testing, psychological profiling, and deep, invasive questioning. I did not hold a single thing back. I laid out the entire timeline of the gaslighting. I explained my demanding corporate accounting job and the extreme sleep deprivation of raising an infant alone. Then I placed the printed router logs on his desk. I explained exactly how the baby monitor was hacked from a remote IP address. I showed him the timestamp of the looped video injection and the rapid deletion commands. I explained how David had flown home early to ambush me with a pre-selected doctor while the adrenaline was still flooding my system. For 4 agonizing hours, I sat under the bright fluorescent lights, terrified that my exhaustion and my lingering panic would make me look unstable. I was so afraid that the trap David had set was so perfectly constructed that even a brilliant doctor would see me as a frantic, paranoid woman. When the final test was completed, Dr. Reed set his pen down on the desk and folded his hands. He looked at me with an expression of absolute piercing clarity. "Chloe," he said, his voice steady and deeply grounded, "you are not experiencing postpartum psychosis. You are not suffering from hallucinations, night terrors, or any form of psychotic detachment from reality. You are entirely, perfectly sane." A hot, ragged breath escaped my lips, and I felt hot tears well up in my eyes. It was the first time in days that someone had looked at me and validated my reality. "What you are experiencing?" Dr. Reed continued, his tone sharpening with professional disgust, "is a textbook, highly sophisticated case of severe psychological abuse and extreme spousal gaslighting. Your husband orchestrated an elaborate trauma response to manufacture a false medical narrative. It is incredibly cruel, but it is not going to work." Dr. Reed immediately drafted a comprehensive sworn medical affidavit. He documented his extensive findings, officially declaring me to be of perfectly sound mind, emotionally stable, and an exceptionally fit mother. He explicitly discredited the preliminary notes taken by David's hand-picked doctor, citing a gross lack of clinical protocol and glaring conflicts of interest. When I walked out of that medical building, holding the sealed psychiatric affidavit in my hands, I knew I had just secured the ultimate weapon. David's emergency conservatorship bid was now legally dead on arrival. The judge would take one look at Dr. Reed's sworn testimony and throw the entire petition straight out of court. I had secured the money. I had secured my sanity. Now it was time to let my husband hang himself with his own rope. Thursday evening arrived with a quiet, tense stillness. I returned to our sprawling colonial house and instantly slipped back into the character they had written for me. I wore baggy sweatpants, kept my hair unbrushed, and moved around the kitchen with slow, heavy steps. I held my sweet Lily close to my chest, burying my face in her soft hair, so David would not see the cold, calculating fire burning in my eyes. David was practically vibrating with arrogant, victorious energy. He walked around the house with the confident swagger of a man who believed he had just successfully pulled off the ultimate heist. While we were eating dinner in the kitchen, he casually brought up the upcoming weekend. "Chloe," he said, placing his hand over mine on the marble countertop, "I know you are still feeling incredibly overwhelmed and anxious. The annual summer charity gala is this Saturday night at the church. I know we usually attend together, but I really think you should stay home this year. You need a quiet house to rest your mind. I will go and represent our family. I can make our usual donation and explain to everyone that you are just taking some much-needed time to recover." The summer charity gala was the absolute pinnacle of the social season for our massive, affluent megachurch. The sprawling banquet hall would be filled with over 300 of the city's most elite residents, wealthy property investors, local politicians, prominent doctors, and the entire community of people David relied on to maintain his pristine public image would all be sitting in that room. I offered him a weak, grateful smile. "Thank you, David," I whispered softly. "I really do not think I can handle a crowd right now. You go. I will stay here with Lily." He kissed my forehead, completely satisfied with my submission. Later that night, after I had put Lily to sleep in her crib, I walked softly down the dark hallway toward the master bedroom. As I passed David's home office, I noticed the heavy wooden door was pushed slightly ajar. A sliver of warm yellow light spilled out onto the carpeted floor. I stopped walking, holding my breath. I could hear David speaking on his cell phone. He had the device on speakerphone, and the familiar sharp voice of my mother-in-law echoed in the quiet room. I pressed my back completely flat against the hallway wall, melting into the shadows, and listened. I spoke to the lead pastor this afternoon. David was saying, his voice brimming with excited pride. He is going to give me a 5-minute slot on the main stage right before the primary charity auction begins. It is the absolute perfect timing, Mom. Everyone will be seated and paying attention. "And you are sure she is not going to insist on attending?" Barbara asked, her tone crisp and suspicious. "We cannot have her showing up and acting normal." "She is completely broken," Mom. David laughed, a dark, cruel sound that made my stomach physically turn. "She agreed to stay home the second I suggested it. She thinks I am doing her a massive favor. It is almost pathetic how easily she caved." "Good," Barbara replied. "Now, what exactly are you going to say on that stage, David? You need to hit the right tone. You cannot sound eager. You have to sound devastated." "Oh, I have the whole speech memorized," David boasted. "I am going to stand up there in front of all those investors and community leaders, and I am going to break down. I am going to tearfully announce that my beautiful wife is suffering from a tragic, rapid mental decline. I will tell them she is experiencing violent delusions and that I am completely heartbroken. I will frame myself as the ultimate suffering, devoted Christian husband, trying desperately to hold his family together in the face of a terrible medical tragedy." "It is a brilliant strategy," David. Barbara agreed, her voice softening into proud maternal approval. "You need to control the public narrative before the court date next week. When the judge grants the psychiatric hold and she is institutionalized, people will inevitably ask questions. But if you play the weeping martyr on stage this Saturday, the entire community will rally around you. They will offer you their sympathy, their prayers, and their support." "Exactly," David said. "And the best part is that it paves the way for Jessica." In a few months after the divorce is filed and Chloe is locked away, I can slowly introduce Jessica to the congregation. I will tell them she is a close friend who stepped in to help me raise Lily during the darkest period of my life. The church will absolutely love it. They will see her as a savior. We can bring my son out in public and just tell everyone we adopted him. It is going to be flawless. I stood perfectly frozen in the dark hallway, the cold wood of the wall biting into my spine. The sheer monstrous narcissism required to invent such a plan was almost incomprehensible. My husband did not just want to destroy my life in the quiet privacy of a courtroom. He wanted to use my engineered destruction to elevate his own social status. He wanted to stand on a brightly lit stage, accept the pity and applause of 300 wealthy elites, and use their blind sympathy to completely legitimize his mistress and his secret child. I listened as they wrapped up their sickening conversation, congratulating each other on their impending victory. I walked silently away from the office door and stepped into the master bathroom. I closed the door without making a single sound and turned to look at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. My eyes were dark and incredibly hard. The terrified, sleep-deprived mother who had swung a baseball bat at an empty nursery room was completely, entirely dead. David wanted an audience. He wanted a grand, beautifully lit stage to perform his masterpiece of deception. He wanted the attention of every single influential investor and community leader in the city. He thought he was building a glorious monument to his own cleverness. A slow, dangerous smile curved the corners of my mouth. I was not going to stop him from getting on that stage. I was not going to interrupt his grand performance. I was going to let him put on his expensive tuxedo, walk up to that microphone, and look out at the sea of wealthy, powerful faces. I was going to let him build his beautiful, spectacular stage right there in the center of the megachurch. And then I was going to turn that very gala into the absolute public graveyard of his reputation. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy, rolling thunderstorm that washed the streets of Chicago in a cold, gray light. I stood before the tall mirror in my master bedroom and examined the woman looking back at me. For the past 4 days, I had played the role of a broken, hysterical shell of a mother. I had shuffled around this house in stained sweatpants, muttering soft apologies, and letting my husband believe his psychological poison had completely rotted my mind. I had let his mother feed me fake anxiety pills that I secretly spit into the bathroom sink. But tonight, the pathetic costume was finally coming off. I was stepping into my armor. I chose a tailored razor-sharp emerald green designer suit. It was a piece I usually reserved for high-stakes corporate financial audits, the kind of garment that commanded immediate absolute authority in a hostile boardroom. I pinned my hair back into a sleek, unforgiving style, applied a slash of deep crimson lipstick, and slipped my feet into sharp black stilettos. I looked nothing like a woman teetering on the very edge of a psychiatric facility. I looked exactly like a woman preparing to liquidate a fraudulent empire. I drove toward the massive, sprawling campus of our megachurch. The rain beat a steady rhythm against my windshield, matching the cold, calculated thumping of my heart. The parking lot was already packed with a glittering ocean of luxury vehicles. Heavy Mercedes SUVs and sleek imported sports cars sat under the bright security lights. This was not a modest, quiet congregation. This was a highly exclusive, deeply wealthy community of the city's elite. Property developers, local politicians, investment bankers, and surgical chiefs filled these velvet pews every Sunday, exchanging business cards alongside their weekly prayers. This was David's primary hunting ground. This was the exact place where he built his pristine, untouchable reputation as a devoted family man and a brilliant real estate director. I parked my car near the dark edge of the lot, far away from the bustling valet stand. I reached into my designer bag and pulled out a small, sleek remote control. It was wirelessly connected to the digital projector system I had quietly hacked into earlier that afternoon using my administrative network access. I took a deep breath, letting the damp night air fill my lungs, and walked toward the grand entrance of the banquet hall. I did not walk straight through the main, heavily decorated doors. I slipped quietly through the side catering entrance, navigating the busy, fragrant corridors, until I reached the heavy, soundproof double doors at the very back of the main ballroom. I opened the right door just a fraction of an inch, leaving enough space to see the massive stage and hear the booming acoustics of the expensive sound system. The room was absolutely breathtaking. 300 of the city's most influential people sat at round tables covered in crisp white linen, surrounded by tall, cascading floral centerpieces. Giant crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden, forgiving glow over the wealthy crowd. The gentle clink of silver forks and polite, muted laughter hummed through the air. Then the lead pastor took the stage, tapping the microphone to silence the room. He spoke eloquently about charity, community, and the heavy burdens we all carry in our private lives. He announced that before the primary auction began, a beloved, respected member of the congregation needed to share a deeply personal struggle and ask for the community's collective prayers. My stomach churned with a toxic mixture of profound disgust and cold anticipation as David walked up the carpeted steps to the podium. He looked incredibly handsome in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He adjusted the microphone with a practiced, humble grace that I used to find endearing. He gripped the edges of the heavy wooden podium, lowering his head for a brief, incredibly dramatic moment of silence. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for him to speak. When he finally looked up, his face was the absolute picture of a grieving, exhausted, deeply devoted husband. "Thank you." David began, his voice thick with perfectly manufactured, trembling emotion. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Usually my beautiful wife Chloe stands right here beside me, but tonight I stand before you alone, carrying a weight that has nearly broken my heart." A soft collective murmur of genuine sympathy rippled through the sea of wealthy faces. I watched him from the shadows, marveling at the sheer sociopathic ease with which he delivered his practiced lines. He was completely comfortable lying to hundreds of his peers. Over the past few months, David continued his voice cracking with expert theatrical precision. I have watched the woman I love slowly slip away from me. Chloe is suffering from a rapid, severe mental decline. It started with simple confusion, but it has escalated into terrifying, violent delusions. She is experiencing severe visual hallucinations. Just a few nights ago, she broke down a door in our home in a state of absolute paranoia, terrified of things that simply were not there. He paused, pulling a crisp white handkerchief from his tuxedo pocket and pressing it gently to the corner of his eye. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. He was portraying himself as the ultimate tragic hero, a faithful man desperately trying to hold his crumbling family together. I have consulted with top medical professionals, he told the hushed crowd, his voice dropping into a raspy, burdened whisper. And we are making the incredibly painful decision to seek intensive residential psychiatric care for her. It breaks my heart to see her brilliant mind fracture. I am doing everything in my power to protect our infant daughter and maintain a safe, loving home while my wife battles these terrifying demons. I shifted my gaze to the front row. Sitting at the absolute center table was my mother-in-law, Barbara. She was wearing an elegant silver gown, clutching a tissue and dramatically dabbing at her dry eyes. Beside her, Sarah placed a comforting hand on her mother's shoulder, looking up at David with a somber, supportive nod. They were a united, beautiful front of sorrow. They were setting the stage, perfectly securing the blind sympathy of 300 powerful people. They wanted to ensure that when I was dragged out of my home and locked in a psychiatric ward next week, this entire community would view it as a tragic medical necessity, rather than a calculated, brutal kidnapping designed to steal my $2.5 million inheritance. I ask for your prayers, David concluded, looking out across the quiet room with a brave, watery smile. I ask for your support during this incredibly dark season, and I ask for your grace as our family navigates this devastating illness. The audience erupted into a massive wave of warm, supportive applause. Several people in the front rows actually stood up to offer a standing ovation for the brave, suffering husband who is sacrificing everything to save his sick wife. I let the applause swell to its absolute peak. I let David bask in the glowing, sympathetic admiration of his wealthy, influential peers. And then I placed both of my hands flat against the heavy wooden doors at the back of the ballroom and pushed them wide open. The heavy doors hit the wall with a loud, echoing crack that sliced straight through the sound of the clapping hands. I stepped out of the shadows and into the grand ballroom. The bright crystal light washed over my emerald suit. I did not slouch. I did not look confused, paranoid, or heavily medicated. I stood with the absolute terrifying posture of a woman who owned the room and everything in it. The people sitting at the tables near the back doors turned around to see what had caused the sudden noise. The moment they saw me, the applause in their section died instantly. It was a physical, terrifying ripple effect. The silence spread like a fast-moving shadow from the back of the room all the way to the front stage. Whispers ignited like dry brush catching fire. "Wait, is that Chloe?" Someone murmured loudly nearby. "I thought she was sick. Why is she here? She does not look crazy." David was still standing at the podium, wiping his eyes with his white handkerchief. He noticed the strange, sudden silence sweeping through his audience. He lowered the cloth and looked out over the crowd, his eyes tracking the turning heads, until his gaze finally landed directly on me, standing at the very end of the long center aisle. I watched the color completely drain from his face. His tan, handsome features turned the shade of old gray ash. His mouth fell open slightly, hanging loose in absolute paralyzed shock. He looked exactly like a man who had just seen a ghost walk out of a freshly dug grave. I began to walk. My black heels clicked a slow, rhythmic, deadly beat against the polished hardwood floor. The sound echoed loudly in the massive, eerily quiet room. 300 of the city's most elite residents stared at me in total, breathless bewilderment. I kept my chin high, my shoulders pulled back, and my eyes locked entirely on my husband. I did not look at the wealthy investors. I did not look at the powerful politicians. I stared straight into the soul of the man who had tried to bury me alive. As I passed the front row, I briefly shifted my gaze down to Barbara. Her hand had frozen halfway to her face, the crumpled tissue clutched tightly in her manicured fingers. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated panic. Sarah had gone completely rigid beside her, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. They knew the heavy sedative they had fed me should have kept me unconscious in bed for another 12 hours. They knew I had absolutely no business standing in this room, looking sharp, entirely lucid, and incredibly dangerous. I reached the base of the stage stairs. David gripped the edges of the heavy wooden podium so hard, his knuckles turned completely white. He was visibly trembling now, his confident, pious posture entirely shattered. He tried to speak to salvage his carefully constructed narrative to play the role of the concerned husband, trying to calm his erratic, unpredictable wife. "Chloe," he stammered into the microphone, his voice thin and incredibly shaky. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here? You are supposed to be resting." "Please let me take you home." I did not answer him. I walked up the short flight of carpeted stairs with calm, deliberate grace. I stepped right up to the podium, completely invading his personal space. I could smell the cold, nervous sweat breaking through his expensive cologne. I looked into his terrified, wide eyes. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not act anything like the hysterical, broken woman he had just described to the entire congregation. I reached out with a steady, perfectly manicured hand and gently but firmly wrapped my fingers around the microphone. I pulled it smoothly out of his shaking grip. David stepped back, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically toward his mother, sitting frozen in the front row. I turned to face the massive silent ballroom. 300 powerful, influential people held their collective breath, waiting for the broken, delusional woman to have a tragic public meltdown. I offered them a bright, perfectly composed, razor-sharp smile. "Thank you, David, for your touching concern," I said, my voice ringing clear, strong, and completely unwavering through the massive speakers. But tonight, I brought a special presentation to show everyone just how dedicated this family truly is. The air in the grand sanctuary grew so thick, it felt like breathing underwater. I held the microphone tightly in my right hand, feeling the cool metal grounding me to the reality of the moment. David stood completely paralyzed beside the heavy wooden podium, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish pulled out of the ocean. He was staring at me with a look of absolute, unadulterated terror. He knew the heavy sedative his mother had given me should have rendered me completely unconscious. He knew I was supposed to be at home, trapped in a foggy, manufactured delirium. I did not look at him for more than a few seconds. I looked past him, raising my chin, and directing my gaze toward the massive sound and lighting booth suspended at the very back of the auditorium. I caught the eye of the young audio engineer sitting behind the complex soundboard. I had visited him during the technical rehearsal period yesterday afternoon. I had handed him a thick, sealed envelope containing a simple flash drive and 10 crisp $100 bills. I told him that my husband had prepared a special surprise presentation for the charity event, and that all he had to do was ignore the scheduled video file and press play on mine the moment I gave him the cue. I gave the young man a slow, deliberate nod. A low mechanical hum vibrated through the floorboards of the stage as the gigantic motorized projector screen began to descend slowly from the ceiling, dropping down directly behind where David was standing. The congregation shifted in their plush velvet seats, murmuring in quiet, respectful anticipation. They fully expected to see a touching, deeply emotional montage of our family. They expected a carefully curated slideshow documenting my supposed mental decline, accompanied by soft, mournful piano music designed to pull tears from their eyes. The massive screen suddenly flashed a blinding white light, and then a voice filled the cavernous room. It was not a polished, rehearsed speech. It was the raw, unmistakable cold sound of my husband speaking inside the private cabin of his luxury SUV. I logged into the router remotely. From the hotel, David's recorded voice echoed loudly through the massive surround sound speakers, bouncing off the beautiful stained glass windows. I pushed the looped video feed to the monitor, just long enough to make her scream. As soon as I heard her running down the hall, I scrubbed the local drive and executed a hard delete on the cloud backup. There is zero digital evidence. As far as any judge will be concerned, she woke up in a psychotic state and hallucinated the entire thing. A collective echoing gasp erupted from 300 of the wealthiest, most influential people in the city of Chicago. I watched a prominent city councilman sitting in the second row physically recoil in his seat, his eyes wide with shock. The charity director, sitting at a table near the front, dropped his crystal water glass directly onto the polished floor where it shattered into dozens of jagged pieces. The loud sound of breaking glass finally snapped David out of his frozen trance. He lunged frantically toward the podium, wildly pressing the buttons on the control console to cut the audio feed. But the local stage controls had been completely disabled. The recording continued to play mercilessly, ringing out over the heads of the stunned crowd. Now Barbara's voice filled the room, sharp, commanding, and stripped of all her fake grandmotherly warmth. "Listen to me closely," David Barbara's recorded voice demanded. "Your wife is currently sitting on $2.5 million of liquid cash that she refuses to let you manage. She is working herself to death, paying your bills while you fund a second household. That money belongs to this family now. Once the doctor signs off that she is a danger to herself, you get emergency conservatorship, David. You control her money. You take the kid, and she gets locked in a facility." The absolute silence that followed that statement was heavier than anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. It was the crushing, suffocating weight of 300 people simultaneously realizing they were sitting in the presence of pure, calculating evil. I turned my head and looked slowly down at Barbara sitting in the front row. The elegant silver designer gown she wore suddenly looked like a pathetic, cheap costume. The perfectly manicured, wealthy women sitting next to her were visibly leaning away, pulling their expensive silk shawls closer to their bodies, as if Barbara was carrying a highly contagious disease. Her face had completely drained of all color, turning a sickly, ashen shade of gray. She clutched the fabric of her dress, her chest heaving in rapid, panicked breaths. But the audio recording was only the very beginning of their ruin. I raised my hand and signaled the audio booth one more time. The giant screen behind David shifted immediately from a stark black background to a series of crystal-clear, high-resolution photographs. The first image was the sprawling, modern luxury estate on Willow Creek Drive, bathed in bright morning sunlight. The second image was a close-up photograph of David standing on the pristine front porch, holding a dark-haired toddler in his arms, while he passionately kissed Jessica, his former 24-year-old administrative assistant. The confused whispers in the room instantly morphed into a loud, chaotic roar of utter disbelief and outrage. Women covered their mouths with their hands in shock. Men pointed furiously at the giant screen. David stumbled backward, completely abandoning the wooden podium. His face was slick with a cold, terrified sweat. He looked desperately out into the massive crowd, frantically searching the room for a single friendly face, but he found absolutely nothing but deep, searing judgment. The presentation transitioned seamlessly into the financial documents. My extensive corporate forensic accounting expertise was now on full public display. Massive, detailed spreadsheets and bank routing logs filled the 20-foot screen. I had highlighted the most damning sections in bright, undeniable red ink. The crowd saw the fake staging companies. They saw the dummy corporations David had set up to launder his money. They saw the direct line of stolen funds flowing from my personal accounts into the mortgage of his secret suburban mansion. But I knew my personal betrayal would not be enough to turn a room full of powerful investors into a furious mob. I needed them to feel the painful, sharp financial sting themselves. The screen changed one final time, displaying detailed commercial escrow accounts belonging entirely to David's real estate brokerage. I had spent hours in the dark, matching his fraudulent withdrawals, not just to my personal bank accounts, but to the massive investment portfolios of the very people sitting in this beautiful room. The red highlights danced rapidly across the screen, showing hundreds of thousands of dollars missing from residential development funds, commercial property investments, and private equity trusts. He had not just stolen from his wife to fund his secret family. He had been quietly, systematically skimming money off the top of his elite clients' accounts for years. That is when the true unbridled chaos began. A tall, broad-shouldered man sitting at table 4 stood up so violently, his chair tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. I recognized him instantly. He was a major commercial developer who had recently trusted David with a massive luxury condominium project in the downtown district. "You absolute criminal!" The developer roared, his deep voice carrying easily over the mounting noise of the angry crowd. "You have been stealing from the commercial escrow accounts. I gave you $4 million to manage just last month." Other powerful investors began standing up all across the ballroom, their faces twisted in sudden, furious realization. The polished, polite atmosphere of the charity gala vanished completely in a matter of seconds. Wealthy men and women were shouting at the stage, demanding immediate answers and openly threatening severe litigation. David held his hands up in a desperate, pathetic attempt to pacify the angry, surging crowd. "This is a lie," David shouted into his lapel microphone, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "She is sick. I told you all she was violently delusional. She fabricated all of this. She is a computer hacker. It is not real matter." Barbara suddenly bolted out of her seat in the front row. She lunged toward the short set of carpeted stairs leading up to the main stage, tripping over the long hem of her silver designer gown. She scrambled to her feet, her carefully pinned hair falling out of its perfect styling and hanging in wild, messy strands around her pale face. "Do not listen to her," Barbara shrieked, pointing a trembling, accusing finger directly at me. "She is a sick, crazy woman." Those voices on the tape are deepfakes. It is artificial intelligence. She manipulated the audio to frame my son. My son is a good, devoted Christian man. You all know him. I did not back away from her. I simply stood my ground near the center of the brightly lit stage, watching her totally unravel in front of her peers. The congregation did not offer her a single ounce of the warm sympathy they had freely given just 10 minutes earlier. The people sitting in the front rows actively recoiled from her, backing away in deep, profound disgust. They had heard her cold, calculating voice, planning to lock a mother in a psychiatric ward just to steal a trust fund. They knew the awful truth when they heard it. Sarah, who had been sitting next to Barbara, remained completely frozen in her chair. She was sobbing quietly, her face buried deeply in her hands, finally realizing that her entire comfortable life, which had been funded by her brother's stolen money, was completely over. I raised my microphone to my lips. My voice cut cleanly through the shouting and the chaos of the massive room. "You can claim it is a deepfake all you want, Barbara," I said, my tone perfectly level, calm, and completely stripped of any emotion. But the federal government does not prosecute based on deepfakes. They prosecute based on a verified, unalterable paper trail. And I assure you, the paper trail you left behind is incredibly extensive. Right on cue, the heavy soundproof double doors at the very back of the grand ballroom swung wide open. The furious shouting in the room instantly died down, replaced by a stunned, heavy electric silence as the massive crowd turned around to see who was entering the hall. 2 uniformed police officers walked purposefully down the long center aisle. They were flanked by a tall, plainclothes detective wearing a dark professional suit. The detective was holding a thick, heavy black binder tightly under his arm. It was the exact binder my attorney, Amanda, had handed directly to the district attorney's office early this morning. It contained every single downloaded file, every tax evasion document, every forged signature, and every wire fraud receipt I had meticulously pulled from David's highly secure real estate portal. The officers moved with brisk, undeniable authority. The sea of wealthy attendees parted immediately, completely moving out of their way to clear a path. The detective walked straight up the carpeted stage stairs, approaching David with a stern, uncompromising expression. David took a weak, staggering step backward. His eyes darted wildly toward the side catering exits, looking for any possible avenue of escape. But there was nowhere left to run. His entire empire had shrunk to the size of this brightly lit, highly public stage. David Sterling, the detective, said, his voice calm, deep, and entirely professional. We have warrants for your arrest regarding multiple counts of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and federal tax evasion. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." David shook his head frantically, tears of genuine pathetic terror finally spilling down his cheeks. "No, please, you do not understand anything," he begged, holding his hands out toward the officers. "This is a massive misunderstanding. My wife is sick. She is trying to ruin my life. Please just look at her medical records. She is insane." The detective did not entertain a single word of his pathetic pleading. He stepped forward, grabbed David's shoulder firmly, and spun him roughly around. The cold metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping tightly around David's wrists echoed sharply through the microphone I was still holding in my hand. I took a few slow, measured steps across the stage, stopping just inches away from my husband. His expensive black tuxedo looked absolutely absurd now paired with the heavy, restrictive police restraints. He looked up at me, his dark eyes filled with absolute hateful venom and utter crushing defeat. I reached inside my tailored emerald green suit jacket and pulled out a thick folded manila envelope. I held it out toward him, placing it gently into the front pocket of his suit jacket since his hands were no longer available to take it. "That is your official divorce petition," I said, my voice soft enough for only him and the arresting officers to hear. "It includes a judge-signed order granting me full immediate sole custody of Lily. It also includes a permanent, heavily enforced restraining order. You will never come near my daughter again. You will never set foot inside my house again. And you will spend the next several decades of your life sitting in a cold concrete cell trying to figure out how you underestimated me so completely." I stepped back, offering him one final cold, uncompromising look. "You have the right to remain silent, David," I told him softly, echoing the detective's unsaid words. "I highly suggest you use it." The officers turned him firmly around and began marching him toward the edge of the stage. Barbara let out a loud, piercing, hysterical scream. She ran toward the officers, grabbing blindly at her son's arm, begging them to stop and listen to her. The second uniform officer calmly but forcefully pushed her back, warning her to step away immediately. The plainclothes detective paused on the top stair and looked directly at Barbara. Barbara Sterling, the detective, said, his tone completely devoid of any pity, "We will be speaking with you on Monday morning regarding the forged signatures on those federal trust documents you signed for your grandson. I strongly recommend you secure competent legal counsel immediately." Barbara stumbled backward, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as the crushing reality of her own impending federal prison sentence crashed down upon her. She looked wildly around the ballroom at the hundreds of wealthy, influential friends she had spent decades cultivating and trying to impress. Not a single person stepped forward to help her. They simply watched her fall apart with cold, deeply repulsed stares. I stood in silence and watched the officers march David down the long center aisle of the church. It was the very same aisle he had confidently walked down hundreds of times, playing the role of the perfect, generous community leader. Now he was taking a walk of profound, absolute, inescapable shame. He kept his head down, staring blankly at the polished hardwood floor, unable to meet the furious eyes of the clients he had robbed, or the peers he had lied to. The heavy doors at the back of the ballroom closed behind them with a loud thud, leaving the room in a state of stunned, electrified silence. I stood alone in the center of the stage. The heat of the overhead spotlights warmed my skin. The crushing, suffocating fear that had gripped my throat for the past 5 days was entirely, completely gone. The heavy, dark chains of their psychological abuse had been completely shattered. I did not feel small. I did not feel crazy. I felt completely, deeply free. I set the microphone down quietly on the wooden podium. I did not need to offer any closing remarks or defend my actions to the crowd. The absolute mountain of evidence displayed on the screen behind me had spoken perfectly for itself. I turned around and walked slowly down the stage stairs, moving with the steady, unhurried grace of a woman who had just burned a corrupt, abusive empire to the ground and emerged entirely unscathed. The sea of wealthy attendees parted respectfully for me, offering quiet, somber nods as I walked down the center aisle. No one whispered that I was insane. No one looked at me with pity. They looked at me with absolute, profound respect. I walked out of the massive church doors and stepped back out into the cool, rainy night. The terrible storm had finally broken, leaving the evening air smelling fresh, clean, and entirely new. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove home to my beautiful daughter, knowing that she would never have to spend a single day of her life living in the dark shadow of their terrible lies. The Monday morning following the charity gala brought a profound and beautiful silence to my life. I woke up in my own bed, pulled the warm covers tightly around me, and breathed in the cool morning air. I realized with a deep, swelling sense of relief that I did not have to pretend anymore. There was no more walking on eggshells in my own kitchen, no more swallowing fake anxiety pills, and absolutely no more doubting my own sanity. David was not in the house. He was sitting in a sterile concrete holding cell in the downtown Federal Detention Center, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that offered a stark, humiliating contrast to the tailored designer tuxedo he had worn on stage just 2 nights prior. Amanda, my brilliant and utterly ruthless attorney, had not exaggerated when she told me we were going to build an impenetrable case. The sheer volume of financial evidence I had provided to the district attorney's office was so overwhelming, so meticulously organized, and completely undeniable that the federal prosecutors moved with unprecedented lightning speed. David was officially indicted on 42 separate criminal counts. The extensive list of charges included massive wire fraud, federal tax evasion, corporate embezzlement, and interstate financial crimes. The judge presiding over his initial bail hearing took one single look at the severe flight risk he posed with his hidden offshore shell companies and completely denied his request for bail. The arrogant, polished real estate director, who had confidently believed he could lock me in a psychiatric asylum to steal my family legacy, was now facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 25 years in federal prison. He would lose the absolute best years of his life locked inside a cold steel cage of his own making. But the criminal charges against my husband were only the very first domino to fall in the spectacular, satisfying collapse of his secret empire. You cannot steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from wealthy investors and deliberately evade federal taxes without inviting the absolute crushing wrath of the Internal Revenue Service. Less than 48 hours after David was handcuffed and paraded through the center aisle of the megachurch, the federal government moved to aggressively seize all of his fraudulent assets. This completely included the beautiful, modern luxury estate on Willow Creek Drive. I did not go to the property to watch the seizure happen, but Amanda kept me thoroughly updated on every single delicious detail. Federal agents arrived at the pristine suburban house with official seizure notices and heavy cardboard boxes for evidence collection. Jessica, the 24-year-old former secretary who had been happily living a carefree life of luxury, funded entirely by my grueling 60-hour work weeks, was given exactly 2 hours to pack her personal belongings and vacate the premises. It turns out that her deep, abiding love for David was entirely conditional upon his stolen wealth. The very second she realized the bank accounts were totally frozen, the luxury cars were being actively repossessed, and the massive house was seized by the government, she completely abandoned him. She packed her bags, grabbed the little boy, and moved out of the state, leaving absolutely no forwarding address. She did not attend a single one of David's court hearings. She simply vanished into thin air the moment the stolen money dried up, leaving David with absolutely nothing and no one to comfort him. The social and legal devastation extended far beyond my soon-to-be ex-husband. Barbara and Sarah, my cruel conspiratorial in-laws, found themselves completely trapped in a nightmare they could not simply smile their way out of. The sprawling, wealthy mega-church congregation that Barbara had spent 3 decades meticulously cultivating turned their backs on her instantly and entirely. The elite community leaders and wealthy investors who had attended the charity gala were not just horrified by the psychological abuse she had actively plotted against me. They were absolutely enraged that their own commercial investment portfolios had been quietly drained to fund her son's illicit lifestyle. Barbara and Sarah were publicly disgraced and formally ousted from the church community. They could not show their faces at the local grocery store, the salon, or the country club without inviting cold stares and harsh, judgmental whispers. But the brutal social exile was the absolute least of their problems. The federal investigators had my downloaded tax documents, clearly showing Barbara's forged signatures on the fraudulent trust paperwork. She was formally charged as a willing co-conspirator in the massive tax evasion scheme, facing her own terrifying reality of federal prison time. To make matters infinitely worse, the defrauded real estate investors launched a massive coordinated civil lawsuit against David and anyone connected to his shell companies. The aggressive litigation completely drained whatever legitimate savings Barbara and Sarah had left to their names. They were forced to sell their longtime family home to cover the mounting legal fees and restitution costs, moving into a tiny, cramped apartment on the far outskirts of the city. The arrogant women who had casually plotted to throw me into a mental institution to steal my parents' money were now utterly bankrupt, socially ruined, and facing their own grim legal consequences. As their corrupt world burned entirely to the ground, I quietly and peacefully walked away completely unscathed. I filed the divorce papers and easily secured full permanent sole custody of my beautiful daughter Lily. With the protective blind trust fully established and my flawless psychiatric clearance on file, the court proceedings were incredibly brief and entirely in my favor. I sold the massive colonial house we had shared. It simply held too many dark memories of creeping shadows and hidden monitoring cameras. I took Lily and we moved into a stunning, bright new home in a wonderful, welcoming neighborhood surrounded by excellent schools and sprawling green parks. I had a top-tier state-of-the-art security system installed, giving me the absolute peace of mind to sleep deeply and soundly every single night without a shred of fear. I also made a massive, empowering shift in my professional life. I realized that my highly specialized corporate forensic accounting skills were far too valuable to waste on a massive, faceless firm. I took my corporate bonuses and the clean, untainted money from my protective blind trust, and I opened my own independent financial accounting firm. I chose to dedicate my entire professional practice to helping women who are going through high-conflict divorces. I use my expertise to hunt down hidden assets, dismantle shell companies, and expose severe financial abuse for women who feel trapped financially hostage and entirely invisible. My independent firm grew incredibly fast, and today I am thriving both financially and emotionally. I am my own boss. I set my own hours, and I never have to miss a single bedtime story or weekend trip to the park with my sweet daughter. Sometimes I sit on the back patio of my beautiful new home, watching Lily play in the bright, warm afternoon sun, and I think back to that terrifying night in the nursery. I think about how incredibly close I came to losing absolutely everything. They tried to convince me I was weak, crazy, and completely alone. They tried to use my deep love, my physical exhaustion, and my hard work as heavy weapons against me. But they entirely forgot that a mother protecting her child and her own sanity is the most dangerous, unstoppable force on earth. The cruel people who tried to bury me alive are now permanently locked in the very nightmare they so carefully designed for me, while I am living a life filled with absolute peace, bright light, and total freedom. If you are watching this right now and you are dealing with manipulative, toxic people who actively make you question your own reality, I need you to listen to me very closely. You are not crazy. You are not alone. Do not ever let anyone gaslight you into surrendering your power, your wealth, or your hard-earned peace of mind. Trust your own instincts, gather your evidence quietly in the dark, and walk away with your head held high, knowing you are entirely worthy of a safe and honest life. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If this journey of finding truth and delivering justice resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of strength and survival. I would also absolutely love to know exactly where you are watching from and what time it is there right now, so please drop a comment below to let me know. Remember, Your worth is never up for negotiation, and the truth always finds a way to come to the light. Take wonderful care of yourself and stay incredibly strong. Looking back on the absolute wreckage David left behind, I realize that the most dangerous thing a person can do is hand the keys to their own reality over to someone else. We are taught to trust our spouses completely. We are taught that marriage is a safe harbor where we can build our nest eggs and raise our children without looking over our shoulders. But when the person sharing your bed tries to convince you that your own mind is failing, you must step back and look at the cold, hard facts. Never let anyone make you doubt your own sanity or your inherent worth. Toxic people will always try to isolate you and make you feel entirely dependent on them. They will try to drag you down into the absolute pitch black dark so you cannot see the terrifying truth of what they are doing behind your back. But here is the vital secret they do not want you to know. When they drag you into the dark, you do not have to stumble around blindly. You can use that darkness to quietly sharpen your own weapons. You can use the silence they enforce to build an impenetrable fortress for yourself and your family. They rely entirely on your shock and your deep emotional grief to keep you permanently paralyzed. But you are always so much stronger than they ever bet on. I traded my fear for cold, calculated logic, and it completely saved my daughter's life and my financial future. I know I am not the only one who has faced this kind of staggering betrayal from the very people who were supposed to love and protect us. Have you ever caught a toxic family member or a spouse in a massive, elaborate lie just by noticing one tiny, out-of-place detail? Did a misplaced receipt, a hidden bank statement, or a strange text message completely unravel an entire web of deceit in your life? Please tell me your specific story in the comments below. I read every single one, and we all draw incredible strength from sharing our hard-won victories over the people who arrogantly tried to break us. And while you are down there in the comments, do not forget to let me know what state you are watching from today and exactly what time it is there right now. It is incredibly comforting to know we have this massive, wonderful community connecting from all across the country at all hours of the day and night. If you genuinely loved watching this deceitful, greedy family get exactly the karma they so richly deserved, please hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and reach other people who might desperately need to hear a story of survival and triumph today. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss another highly satisfying story of ultimate justice. You deserve a life filled with absolute honesty and profound peace. Never settle for anything less.